All right. We'll go ahead and call the revenue back to order after the lunch recess. What we decided before lunch was we would stick with acquisition value being at 130, since that's what everybody's here for anyway. So without further ado, we will go ahead and dive into acquisition value property tax system, LSO 24, LSO 317 and 318. LSO staff's up here to walk us through the bill. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Josh Anderson, LSO. Yeah, as you noted, so there's two bills here. 317, which is the statutory changes, and then 318, which is the constitutional amendment. This bill, or these bills, were requested at our October meeting up in Casper. If you remember, at that time, the committee did sponsor a number of other property tax relief bills. There were the two bills on exemptions, the two bills related to a property tax cap, and then a bill on the property tax refund program. So this bill, in a lot of ways, is very similar to the cap bill that we discussed at that last meeting and the committee sponsored. So starting with 317, which is the statutory changes. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, correct. 24 LSO 317, working draft 0.4. You'll see on page 2, primarily just a couple of conforming amendments indicating that the value of the all other property class would be valued as determined in this new paragraph 3913-103B 18. And then, so that starts then over on the page 3, line 4. It says the following shall apply to the valuation of all other property, real and personal, except agricultural land. And then subparagraph A, all other property shall have a base value equal to the fair market value of the property on January 1, 2019, or the date the property was acquired, whichever is later. The base value of any real property shall be increased by 5% per year for every year after the year the base value is established. The amount determined under this subparagraph shall be used to determine the taxable value of the property until one of the following occurs. And then you have subdivision 1, a substantial improvement is made to the property on or after January 1, 2019. The cost of the improvement shall be valued using its cost of construction, which shall be calculated at, and you'll see there I have X dollars per square foot of the improvement. You'll see the staff comment there. Mr. Chairman, instead of putting this cost determination in statute, it could also be done by authorizing the department to do that by rule. So that was just one question we had as we were drafting this. And then to finish that subdivision, the cost of the improvement shall be added to the previous base value to determine a new base value of the property. Subdivision 2, ownership or responsibility for payment of taxes is transferred to a new person. A property subject to this subdivision shall be valued at the fair market value of the property on the date of the transfer. The value determined shall be the new base value of the property until it is further transferred as provided in this subdivision or an improvement is made as provided in subdivision 1. And then on page 5, Mr. Chairman, paragraph B, as used in this paragraph, improvement shall not include maintenance and shall not include minor construction. That does not affect, again, here we had a blank amount of not more than X% of the value. And again, that would be up to the committee to determine the appropriate way to proceed there. And then section 2, the effective date is January 1, 2025. If the constitutional amendment is approved, and then I take questions there, I can go into the constitutional amendment, whichever you prefer, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any questions so far? Yes, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a quick comment on page 3, line 22 of this draft. It says improvement shall be valued using at its cost of construction. It looks like is at?
Yeah, just a typo.
typo,
there. Excuse me,
yeah,
Mr.
that's-
Chairman. Yeah, just a
thank you.
typo there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can't slip anything past the Senate revenue. Okay, I had a question for you on page 4. For the folks listening at home that may be confused about the subdivision shall be valued at the fair market value of the property on the date of the transfer of ownership or responsibility for the payment of taxes on the property. Can you talk about the or responsibility for the payment of taxes and what types of scenarios that would entail?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I think the thought there was that, you know, if someone else just agreed, hey, you know, if you're trying, basically was to try to address an issue where someone was trying to get around a transfer where, hey, I'm not selling it to you, you're moving in, you're paying the taxes or whatever. So I think it was just to kind of capture any kind of transfer where someone else is going to be taking the responsibility for payment of those taxes.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else before we move on to the resolution? Seeing none, go ahead and continue on to 318, please.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, so yeah, this is 24 LSO 318, working draft 0.4, constitutional amendment. And this is largely the same language that we just looked at in 317. You'll see on page 2 that it provides all other property, real and personal, shall be valued as provided in subsection E of this section. Then there's a new subsection E, notwithstanding any other provision of this Constitution, beginning January 1 of 2025, the all other property, real and personal class shall be valued as provided in this subsection, and makes clear there that it shall not apply to agricultural and grazing lands, which are already separately valued. And again, then most of the rest of this is language we just looked at. All other property shall have an initial base value of the fair market value on January 1 of 2019. You'll see it provides that that amount may be adjusted for inflation as determined by the legislature, which in the bill was set as 5%. Of course, that's a policy choice for this group. Then you'll see again, until one of the following occurs, a substantial improvement is made to the property after January 1, 2019, which shall be valued as the cost of construction as defined by the legislature, or ownership or responsibility for payment of taxes is transferred under paragraph 2. And then that's again valued at fair market value at the date of the transfer, which is then the new base value of the property. And then the balance of the bill is a ballot statement, just saying that adoption of this amendment will specify effective January 1, 2025, the base value for property tax is on the fair market value of the property on January 1, 2019, or the date the property was most recently acquired. The property would retain that value until tax liability is transferred or until there's an improvement to the property. The amendment would authorize the legislature to provide that the base value may be adjusted for the cost of inflation. And then the final bit of the bill would then, as we saw on the CAP bill back in October, would also repeal that previous Senate Joint Resolution 3 and substitute it with this resolution. So those are the two bills, Mr. Chairman, and Taylor may have some additional info on the fiscal impacts of this.
Okay, before we get to fiscal, any questions on the statutory language and construction of the two bills? Josh, looking at the proposed constitutional amendment, if this were to pass, it'd probably be one of the wordiest parts of the Constitution. Does it have to be that long, or is there a way to shrink it down to about, because most of the rest of the Constitution is like a paragraph or a couple sentences. We don't typically see a lot of like legislative reading type amendments in the Constitution. Is there a way to knock this thing down to a paragraph or so?
Mr. Chairman, sure, that could definitely be done. You know, as we discussed briefly in October, we had done this type of a resolution before with this idea. We hadn't really put it into statutory implementation before. So this bill was basically just a resurrect of a previous version I'd done on this, but it certainly could be simplified and give more general guidance to the legislature.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Any further questions on that before we go to fiscal? Seeing none? Take it away, Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Taylor DuPont, LSO Budget Fiscal. I'll be referencing document 6-03, which is titled 24 LSO 0317 Property Tax Acquisition Value Fiscal Impact Estimate. So, Mr. Chairman, to be brief, our estimate for the fiscal impact, which is equivalent to the tax relief provided by this bill for tax year 2025, is about 153 million. And then that decreases in absolute value, so going towards zero over time to tax year 2028. Now, that decrease over time is a bit unusual from the estimates I've seen. That's because the bill as written requires a 5% increase after each year after the base year. Obviously, what that number is a policy decision for the legislature, and we can easily rerun this estimate for any given number. In general, if that rate is less than 5%, you'll see that decrease to the impact or tax relief be postponed or eliminated. And if the percentage increase is higher than 5%, you'd see that accelerated. And I can answer any questions about the details of this estimate or anything if the committee has any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just real quickly, that first 153 million, that's largely due to the fact that, is that include that 2019 kind of clawback period? Did you take that into consideration in that number?
Taylor?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, that number is essentially the difference between our projected taxes for tax year 2025 under current law, and then under this acquisition value. So essentially what that is it's all of the properties back to their 2019 base year times that 5% increase, and then adjusted by our estimate of the proportion of how many of those may have sold since 2019, and then jumped up to their new acquisition value in the later year.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Must have done a good job. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. I guess we'll go ahead and start with 318 or 317. Anybody wish to come up and testify? Come on up. Taxpayers Association is here. We'll go ladies first.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ashley Harpstreet, Wyoming Taxpayers Association. As you approach on how to deal with the residential assessed valuation, we believe it is very important that everyone understands the facts. WTA prides itself in producing factual data that comes at a need to have folks understand what it is. In this current consideration, we want you to have a clear understanding of Wyoming's ranking. Per previous testimony, it was noted WTA had stated Wyoming ranks 11th per capita for the highest property tax or ad valorem collection. This is true. However, this committee and the public in general have been talking about residential property or ad valorem collection for residents. When you remove minerals from ad valorem property taxation and you look at residential Wyoming taxation, ranks 47th for the lowest in the nation. I provided you with this data previously, and I'm happy to share it again. I'm not here today to discuss specific burdens are on the taxpayer, as this is for you to decide. WTA just wants to be clear, anyone using our data should be using it in an intelligent manner rather than attempting to misinform. With that said, without a measured approach of reduction in spending or additional resources to meet the cost of services, anything that limits property tax revenue will result in a future shift of burden from one tax classification, residential, to another, commercial, industrial, and mineral. This poses significant pressure on an already unbalanced system and only further exacerbates Wyoming's economic volatility. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the Taxpayers Association? You none?
I
Thank
just,
you. Oh, yep,
quick,
co-chairman.
I was taking notes, Mr. Chairman, and 11th per capita when you include minerals.
Correct.
So
Chairman.
whatever that total property tax is, I don't know, 2.6 billion divided by us, 11th with minerals and 47th residential. Who's lower than us?
Mr. Chairman, it would be Colorado, Alaska, or no, Hawaii. And I'll have to look that back up. I don't have it
Okay.
right off the top of my head. But I remember Hawaii because I'm always surprised by that. In Colorado, we're kind of neck and neck. But I would like to note, Mr. Chairman, that Colorado does also impose an income tax.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Ms. Harpstreet. We'll just go from my right to the left, and we'll go to Mr. Sabrowski. Please introduce yourself again. Tell us your
Thank you,
thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, committee. Dan Sabrowski, Casper, Wyoming, bar none, actually. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to direct my comment, I think it forms into a question with Senator Pappas. Prior to lunch and the exchange with Mrs. Rainey, and you had discussed expanding your house from around 1,300 square feet to 6,000 square feet. As a building contractor, I've spoken to people that are concerned about their property taxes, and many of them, the property taxes are flying so far out of control, they're scared to even make improvements to their houses, wondering what the property tax liability is going to be, to build a shop, to add on. So Mrs. Rainey's idea of starting off where your acquisition was, and that's what you live with, and then if you do all this expansion, it shows back up when you sell the house again. Do you think, back to what I was saying, the economic activity that would happen with people not afraid to expand their homes or build a shop or, build up on their property, knowing there's not going to be a tax liability for it, do you think that would drive some economic activity, create some jobs?
But we're not going to do it back and forth, so we'll take your input and then we'll
Okay.
take it in, but we don't typically do debates during a committee
Okay.
meeting, so.
And then, so my next point then would, Mr. Chairman, more to the co-chairman, because we're from the same county. I know, Mr. Co-chairman, you made the comment that a lot of this issue came from COVID, these excessive property tax jumps. But I remember in 2018, we developed some land, a business partner of mine out in Bar None, and our tax liability, property tax liability was quite extreme. So we appealed that, showed up at appeal. There was a dozen people there. We were the last ones to show up. One by one, they came out of that meeting denied. The little lady, elderly lady, probably in her 70s, went in before us, and she showed up with an appraisal of her property. Her appraisal, she lived on limited means in a trailer house on a lot she owned, had grown from over the years in the low 20s up to 30,000, stayed pretty consistent. She could easily budget for that on her limited means. In 1 year, and this is the year prior to our county assessor, Matt Keating, being elected, her property value jumped from 30,000 to 160,000. So she shows up with an appraisal. She was nervous about going in there. We kind of encouraged her that, look, there are people too, just state your case. You got an appraisal there. You should do fine. She come out of there denied. She couldn't afford those property taxes. And so this problem started before COVID. And it's time we take some serious relief. These bills that come up, like this acquisition bill, when you read through there, acquisition bill sounds good, and that's what the public's looking for, some type of relief like that. But then when you read these bills, which most people don't, there's too much watered down in there. It doesn't give real true relief. And we really have to get serious. This part, this property tax thing is just off the rails. And I don't know, we can assume, I know there are some that really have wanted a income tax over the years. And maybe this is tied to that. Since we can't get an income tax, maybe we need to, maybe somewhere in the process, people realized, oh, let's make up those revenues from property tax. And then I guess my last point would be, I know on the previous thing with the state lands acquisition, this will help stabilize tax increases, but I would also comment, so would reining in overspending. That's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions? Any questions? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Who's next?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this chance to speak to you.
Please introduce yourself to the
Oh, I'm
committee.
sorry. My name is Gary Brown. I'm from Cheyenne, citizen, concerned citizen here, and have talked to a lot of the people around this area. I have 3 friends here who live out east of town that this last year, their property tax went up 100%. I know the co-chairman was kind of shocked earlier before the lunch break. This lady's going up 125%. When she said that, I wasn't surprised at all, because I've heard it from many people that their property taxes have gone up so much that they are thinking about selling their homes. And then I have 2 families, an older couple, senior citizens, in my church who have not paid their property taxes now for 2 years. They can't afford it. And then another lady who's a widow who has not paid her property taxes for over 2 years. And these people come to me in tears. They're going to lose their homes. And yet we see these property taxes going up and up and up, and nothing is done about it. I know in the last session, we had several bills that just got killed, or they got watered down so much they weren't worth voting for. And the things have got to change. People are losing their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate you coming down here and telling us your story. Any questions for Mr. Brown? Thank you, sir. Ms. Moline?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, to talk about Bill Draft 317. I appreciate where this bill goes. It does give some certainty. One of the problems I do have with it is on page 3, line 14, lines 13 and 14, and shall be increased by 5% per year. As was pointed out before, using the rule of 72, that so about every 14 years, your property tax will double. The problem I have with that is that it shall be increased by 5%. And I would rather have, and I don't know, there's pluses and minuses of any indice that you use. The Consumer Price Index looks at everything. So if fuel prices would triple, that would drive that up. I don't know if there's an indice that's specific to property, which might not be the best solution, because if property spikes like it has now, we're still going to be looking at a large increase. But I would rather have shall be increased by no more than 5%. So not an absolute of 5% per year. That's just going to cause a lot of problems. I do appreciate that agriculture's not in this, but I will say that a few years ago, because we had irrigated agricultural land in 2 years, went up 50%, and that hurts. But anyway, then on page 4, on line 15, that section 2, where the ownership or the responsibility for the payment of taxes is transferred. A question on that, and I hope I know what the answer is, but I'll use my wife and I as an example. We took our house and put it into a trust. So now the trust is responsible for the taxes on it. And I would assume that by doing financial planning, which is a great idea, would not impact this. I asked that as a question. I hope that would be the case. I understand that if we would all of a sudden be selling it to our sons, well, that'd be a different thing, but by putting it into the trust, I would hope that that would not be considered a transfer of ownership. With that, Mr. Chairman, in favor of the concept, I know this will put a lot of, anytime you institute a new system, it's going to put a lot of burden on a lot of people, but so far in favor of the concept. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Moline? Yes, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, thanks for being here. That was a good point on interfamily, passing title from, say, you and your wife to a family trust. I don't know if, I thought that was a really good question. I don't know if LSO, if this would be the proper place to have them weigh in on how that would be handled in this bill.
Mr. Anderson, as the bill is currently worded, I'm assuming that would rope in any sort of transaction, whether you're a husband and wife going to a trust, that would qualify as a acquisition, correct?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. It would be certainly worthwhile to clarify that in this section, if that was a concern.
Duly noted.
Thank you,
All
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, I just,
Representative Northrop.
thank you. That brings up an interesting point. What about divorce? I mean, if you get divorced and your wife ends up at the house, does it now, she's lived there her whole life or the whole time you're married, does she now have to pay taxes on it because she acquired it?
Those are questions that this committee is going to have to iron out. Yep, absolutely. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, if we could pick somebody else that has to pay the taxes, wouldn't that be the best solution? We didn't have to pay it ourselves. A little bit of tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Appreciate the,
all right.
anything else, Mr. Chairman?
I think you're off the hook, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to Revenue. Well, welcome back. Please introduce yourself and.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Cindy Barlow. I am a taxpayer in Johnson County, Wyoming native, and proud to be here today. So thank you for this opportunity to speak. I would like to talk just a little bit about the fiscal impact that was presented today. When we look at these numbers, we need to look at these numbers in whole. So when we talk about these numbers in whole, intelligently, we realize that they all have to be together. When we look at what was presented here today, I don't see a base year defined in where the numbers began. If you look at this as a total loss, was there also, and I didn't hear this question asked, there's improvements being done to properties at all the time. There's vacant land being improved. So where is that number played into this loss? I don't see a full analysis here that would cause me to question this full impact of what we're seeing as an estimate to acquisition value. There are increases beyond just the CPI. So was that a consideration in this number? Also, we're also using the average of the mill levies. So we're not looking at a weighted average of what this mill levy is. I would ask for and would want to make a decision off of accurate numbers that really show us a strong impact, just like we've seen with the acquisition value study. We did not get a study that would have really empowered this commission to be, or this committee to be able to make a solid decision. We were presented a CAP study, and if you look back at your numbers on page 13 and 14 of the CAP study, you will also see that that study was remarkably flawed. I also present to you that some of the information that should have been in that study is presented here today. You're seeing the annual average proportion of unique properties sold. That was not presented in that study. You're talking about new construction and commercial properties from 20 to 23 that was provided by the Department of Revenue that was not in that study. So I question the validity of the information. And when we look at residential properties in that study showing at 61%, let's talk about flawed data. That's an inflated number because minerals was not included. In order to look at numbers properly, they have to all be together. So I just make that suggestion. As we look at 317, LSO 317, as an acquisition study change in this, I would ask that you guys consider taking out II on page 4, or excuse me, am I on the right base value? Yes, or it's the I. The substantial improvement is made to the property on line 20, page 3. As we talk about improvements, we're talking about an acquisition value, and that after those improvements are made, that's when you would pay a tax on that. Otherwise, you're still paying a tax on an unrealized capital gain. So may we ever be diligent in just looking at what is acquisition value and when that property should change and when that tax should be paid. You just heard great testimony from Kathy Rainey, and you also heard great testimony from the gentleman before me of how this is unsustainable. And I did check on some different properties of each of you up here today before I came up, and I don't know how many of us can look at our properties and say, I can sustain a 50% increase and be able to say that I can afford to pay that. With that being said, I would ask for you to seriously look at acquisition value being a simple definition change. You guys are empowered as the legislature already to define what the value is. So why don't we just look at changing a simple definition of what is fair market value to, if it's a true arm's length transaction between you and I, then isn't that my budget? And isn't that what I should be paid for? And frankly, Governor Freudenthal in his book said the exact same thing, that the legislature holds the power, not the market. And I can show you the book and page. I've got it in the back row. I believe that it's important that we pay attention to what's going on here in our economy and truly understand the numbers that are before us. I don't believe that it's sustainable. I've seen how our system works and how it's a revenue maximization. And frankly, minerals is based off of the market. Minerals is not subject to the county assessor coming up with an adjustment to equalize. So where is that fair and uniform? Seems to me like since the court case in 1988 that we're still up against the same thing. There is not uniformity. There is not equality. And if you're going to compare my house to him and then adjust his house up at some arbitrary number that's supposed to be sustained by market, but then when you go to appeal, that assessor can change, and I've seen them change to what fits to get rid of the appeal. So where do you gain revenue there? And how is that sustained by the sales price? We have an unfair system. We have a system, like Kathy Rainey said, is broken. We hold an obligation, and the people have spoke now all summer long to you guys of how important it is to see this change. I hope you're bold enough and strong enough to make that happen. And I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barlow. Any questions for Ms. Barlow? Questions? Oh, see. Oh, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barlow,
Mhm.
you brought up that on page 3, line 20, on the improvements to this acquisition value approach. Would you give us your opinion? if you don't mind I'm a little bit along the lines with you. I mean, I don't know, adding improvements doesn't necessarily mean that that homeowner's getting any further services from, that's costing the county and the city any more money. What would you recommend if you had an opinion on this, of that paragraph in this bill?
Ms. Barlow?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ide, my suggestion is to strike it. Strike it completely, because ultimately, in the end, if you buy your property and the improvements that you do on your property should be taxed when you sell it to the next buyer. So there really doesn't need to be a clarification there. You can simply take it out. And then I believe you would need to go down and amend on page 4, under II, ownership or the responsibility for the payment of taxes on the property is transferred to a new person on or before January 1. Property subject to this subdivision shall be valued at the fair market value of the property on the date of the transfer of ownership responsibility for the payment of taxes on the property. And you can stop where it says the value determined under this subdivision shall be the new base value for the property until the property is further transferred as provided by the subdivision, period. And then strike the end of 23, 24, and 25.
Quick follow-up.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that paragraph is just a tough paragraph for me too. We're talking about substantial improvement. I guess we can get into this when we're working the bill, but we're trying to pick a number, and that's just arbitrary. So yeah, I think we need to work on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, to add to that, I would only say that when we use words like substantial in our statutes, what may be substantial to one out of 23 counties is going to be different to another. I get the question constantly, are improvements on skids taxable? And again, because it's appertinent to the land, it's taxable. So it becomes a clouded conversation of what do they understand? What does the new assessor understand or the seasoned assessor understand? And it gets interpreted 23 different ways.
Okay. Any more questions for Ms. Barlow? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Barlow.
Yep.
Thank you. Representative Allemand, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Revenue Committee. I'm Bill Allemand from Midwest. I have a little story I want to tell you folks. 2 years ago when I was campaigning, I got a letter. It was not even legible, but with the help of a couple other people, we got it read. It was from a lady in my district, District 58. This is heartbreaking. 2 years ago, while she was out feeding, or 3 years ago, she's 82 now. 3 years ago, she was out feeding her horses in a snowstorm. And on her way back in the house, she had a stroke. She laid on her floor for 3 days with her feet hanging outside during this cold weather. She froze her feet and they had to be taken. At that, or just a few years ago, she was paying $600 in her taxes. Then it went to $9, then it went to $12. She cannot pay it today. And at the end of the session, I called her, we talk on the phone some, and she writes me quite a bit. She sent me a $25 check for my campaign, and it was all she had in her bank account. So when I got out of the session last year, I called this lady, and she said, well, what did you get done for me? I said, absolutely nothing, ma'am. I tried. She started crying. She said, I'm going to lose my house. They're going to send me to an old folks home. I don't need an old folks home because I can take care of myself. But I can't pay these ridiculous taxes. When they were $600, I could pay them, but I can no longer pay them. So what we're going to do to this lady is we're going to take her home. County's going to take her home. We're going to put her in an old folks home. The state's going to be paying for it because she hasn't the money. The property, it was a $600 property. We know it's not worth much, and I've been there a couple times, and it isn't worth much. But so we're going to be paying for her in that home until the day she dies. Folks, we've got to do something. I think this acquisition bill, it's not a great bill, needs quite a little work, but I think it's a start, and she does too. And if there's any questions?
Thank you, Representative. Any questions for Representative Element? Oh, yes, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is just more of a comment than anything. And I want to thank you for that story because that's really a good example of the fact that when you perceive this revenue thing, it actually turns into a death spiral. And that's a perfect example of it. We think it's actually, okay, we're gaining more revenue. And yes, we do have a heart for the people and we think we're gaining more revenue. But in the end, if we leave it unchecked and out of control, it's a death spiral. And sooner or later, it isn't doing what we think it's doing. Even if we take moderate steps to back it down. And I think that's the perfect story. So I just wanted to make that comment because it's important to see that and understand what it ultimately can do if we don't put checks and balances in place and make it manageable and reasonable and sustainable as the word has been used. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really don't have a question. I just want to make a comment. As we talk about taxes, property taxes, sales tax, any tax, we very rarely talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room. In order to offer tax relief of any kind, we have to cut spending. You just can't move the jelly beans from one jar to another jar and call it tax relief. When we start talking, it kind of frustrates me. The first words you hear are, how are we going to backfill this? Well, the idea is not to backfill it. The idea is to shrink government a little bit. The idea is not all of us get to drive Ferraris. I don't think any of us do, but some of us are driving Volkswagens and old pickup trucks. And I can't go to my neighbors and say, oh, I want a Ferrari. You want to throw some money in my hat so I can go get one? Please? They'd laugh at me. But we keep putting more and more pressure on the average person in Wyoming without cutting any spending. And we compare ourselves to other states across the nation. Who cares about that? I have kids that are late 20s, early 30s. They all work. They're all in dual income family homes, and they're barely making it. So until we cut spending, we can do this all day long. But as we take this to the floor, we need to stand up and not backfill it. It's a budget session. It's time we can cut the budget. It's the year to cut the budget, and I hope we can get it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any questions for Representative? Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Representative Elliman, as always. Did you happen to advise this friend of yours to apply to the refund program?
Representative?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storer, yes, I did. And she is looking into that, or she was. I haven't talked to her in a couple months, but she was looking into that. And I told her that's the only help she can get right now. I told her I'm going back to Cheyenne and I'm going to fight for you, ma'am, because your taxes are way too high. And she told me, I got to control my emotions here. She told me, you know, I sent my son, and she listed what all she sent him to grocery store for, lard, and, you know, it was really funky stuff, beans. And, you know, it's all the stuff that an 82, 83-year-old woman might buy who was raised in the country. And she said, when he got home, he had $25, and that's what I'm sending to you. I, of course, did not cash that check. But we've got to do something to help these people. And she's not the only one. There's other people this is my worst case scenario, is this lady. And it's so heartbreaking. And to meet her, and we've got to do something. We've got to get our spending down. We've got to get our taxes down and move on. Did that answer your question? Or would a simple yes would have done it?
Thank you.
Thanks. Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify, obviously, you know, we passed some relief in the last session, and it probably wouldn't have made any difference for her. She probably qualified for it before we made the changes that we made in the last session. But really what we're trying to do in these bills is create reform. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what you're really after for your constituency, is to create reform so there's long-term opportunity for their taxes to stay under control. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes. The way it is right now, it's a subsidy pretty much. If we reform it, they get to keep it right off. You know, they don't have to send it in. But as of right now, I guess you can, or you don't have to look at it, but it's subsidy. And I would rather have the reform and her not have to send it in the first place.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you, Representative. Appreciate you being up here.
Thank you.
Next, please introduce yourself to the committee.
My name is Debbie Gallinopoulos, and I'm just a concerned citizen of Cheyenne, voter, taxpayer. And this is more of a add insult to injury kind of discussion I want to have with you. This last Tuesday, we had a vote in Laramie County. It was a special vote for the fire department. Now, from what I understand, they met the minimum requirements of notifying the public by advertising it once in the newspaper, the written newspaper. Essentially what happened is nobody knew about this. And the reason why I say nobody knew is 347 people out of 7,145 people actually turned out to vote. So 200 people decided for that 7,200 people to increase our taxes on an average of $600 per home. Okay, that's a lot. And what I'm saying is it would be nice to see, as we are talking about reforms, that should there be a property tax issue come up, that anybody within the affected area, it's required that they get a postcard or some sort of notification saying that this is going to happen, especially in an off year, because this was an off year for voting in general. Additionally, it would be also nice to see a requirement for revenue and tax issues that 50% of the people affected for this would have to show up and vote, or the measure would fail. Because this way it gives an incentive on both sides, for and against, to be able to get out the vote and say, you really need to get out and vote because this is going to happen, or it won't happen. But essentially, and you talk about truth in what you're doing, they say it's only going to cost the average owner $300 a year on a $300,000 house. Well, in the county, I dare you to find me a house that's only $300,000. Everyone has 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 acres. That's going to be more like $600, $800, maybe even $1,000 more per year. That's a lot. And only 200 people decided for everyone. And only being notified once in the paper. And if you didn't happen to get the paper that day or read it that day, you were out of luck. So that's my stick. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Gallinopoulos. Thank you for your thoughts. We
I
appreciate
mean, you were talking about side rails.
you.
We need some safety rails for the voters, for the people who are actually paying these things.
Well, we appreciate you coming down today and telling us about it. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. Any questions? Yes, Representative Block.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for that example, because you actually, a couple of things you said in there, but I thought it was interesting. And you'd talked a little bit about, this isn't a direct example, but you talked a little bit about some people, on the average, people are only going to experience X amount on a $300,000 home. But you probably know people in your own district that, for example, there's the people who they're not seeing, I'll take Natrona County, the average is, I think, 18% or something like that was the average. But I know people in my own district that got hit by 50. I know some people in my own district got hit by 100% in my own district. Do you see those same kinds of things? So they say the average is this, but do you see people that then, instead of experiencing the average, they're experiencing some much, much higher? So there are a large number of people experiencing those higher percentages. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, because this is in addition to what you guys are doing. This is like over and above. So although we've already experienced an increase in our taxes because of the annual increase that you guys put upon us, this is in addition to that. This is over and above. And I hate to say it, you're kind of putting yourselves in the same, I hail from Oregon, I'm sorry. They had put through a property tax measure at one point in time called property tax measure number 5 that actually limited the amount of percentage that you could increase property taxes every year. But then as the consequence of that, they started putting bills through that said, this is over and above that property tax measure. And that's how they got all the other funding along with it. So it wasn't just the 5% that it was limited to. They found another way around it to be able to get more, kind of like what this fire district did to us.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your testimony. It is true. I think the problem is this is a special district. And so it's an additional assessment on property taxes that the people that live in the district would vote to place upon themselves. And perhaps the failure is maybe in the notification statutes of our special districts. Maybe that's something we need to look at. Because I believe that every person in the special district should have got a mailing of some kind. And so I think that's a failure. Because I saw the turnout was very, very low. And that's very unfortunate. However, to your point about requiring 50%, yeah, if we did that, I don't think most of our seats would be filled. Because almost any election, I don't know that you're going to get that much turnout in a lot of the seats. So that's very difficult nut to crack. So,
Well, in fairness, I didn't say.
Ma'am, through the
Sorry.
chair, please.
In fairness, I didn't say for your seats. I meant for property tax and
Correct.
revenue measures that affect people. I think that would get people out.
Okay. Duly noted. Thank you so much. We'll go on to Ms. Huxtable, or who's next?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Melissa Schinkel. I am the Teton County Assessor and current president of the Assessors Association. Thank you for being here and working through this with us. We appreciate the opportunity to speak on property tax relief and possible reform. Unfortunately, the association did not have a chance to meet and fully vet the draft. However, our legislative committee of assessors did meet and found several things that would potentially make this bill very difficult, if not impossible, to administer. Dixie Huxtable, our legislative committee chair, is here to discuss those if you would like them in further detail. Thank you.
Ms. Huxtable? We like details.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, and as my colleague said, representing today the legislative chair. So thank you for your time and willingness to listen to the comments. First, a couple just general comments. Property taxes are and have been a hot topic for us. It doesn't go off the hot seat for a county assessor. We hear about property taxes year round, in good years and in bad years. In most cases, the questions that come from taxpayers are either from a lack of understanding or misunderstanding on how our property tax system works, from the point of valuation through the mill levies, through where the taxes go. And so this morning when we heard that a taxpayer had asked a question and hadn't got an answer, that really bothered me, because the assessors are very proud of being able to work with our taxpayers and answer those questions. So just one specific point, I reached out to that assessor over lunch and said, what's the deal with that property and what's going on? I'm not gonna get in the middle of what he said, she said. He did confirm that the property value went up 70% over 3 years. Over a 3-year period, that property went up just about 70%. All the conversation between him and the taxpayer, I'm not gonna address. That's between them. And I think you may get a letter from him respecting that. But it really bothers us when the testimony is that the taxpayer doesn't get the due diligence they should from their elected official. So we do absolutely want to give the answers. Sometimes the answers we give, they don't like or they don't understand, but we do try very hard to give them an explanation, and specifically about valuation. That's usually the biggest question. It comes to us in the form of, why is my taxes so high? But they really need to talk to us about valuation, because that's the piece of the formula that we deal with. As you all know, there's a mill levy involved, there's an assessment ratio involved. So there's other pieces to that tax formula, but what we can deal with as assessors is valuation. So let's talk about the bill that's before us, the 317, which in our opinion is not property tax relief. It is a change in methodology. For some people, it may be property tax relief. For some people, it may not. Most assessors set their target for their ratios to be under 1, not at 1. So when the bill says you're going to change that value to what it's sold for, if that's the language that's being interpreted in this bill, then in some cases, in a lot of cases, that value may go up. There will be some that come down because we deal with a median. But just to be clear, it will affect some both ways. The first administrative issue that we have with this comes with personal property. This bill talks about personal property being treated the same way as real property. Currently, personal property is reported to us annually on renditions. I have multiple accounts in my county that have 100 lines or more of items on that personal property list. For me to reasonably go back to 2019 and come back with that value and put an adjustment on that each item, and then account for the additions and deletions that have occurred since 19, would not be administrable very easily. I'm not even sure I could do it. So that's a problem with personal property being part of this. The second issue that we had that came right up is disclosure. As most of you know, everyone knows, we are a non-disclosure state. There are other statutes out there that forbid the sales price to be disclosed. This language appears, if I'm reading it correctly, if the legislative committee is reading it correctly, that we are going to be using sales price as a market, as a value moving forward. So somewhere we need to look at the rest of those statutes for disclosure, and then the reporting of those sales prices became a topic. The statement of consideration that is currently being used would need a complete revamp in order to get that. The Constitution says we shall value land and improvements individually and separately. I can guarantee you that no statement of considerations in my county come with a breakdown between land and improvements. It is a value. And since we're currently using that value in our analysis, we're not setting a value by using it, we're using it in analysis. That works for us. But in this bill, it would appear that we're going to be setting value, and we have to do land and improvement separately, so those values have to come in that way. So that's an administrative issue that came to the forefront. Another one along those lines is agricultural. While it was clear that agricultural land is intended to be at production value, there are residential properties, structures on those ag lands. When the parcel sells, there is never a breakdown between the house, the buildings, and the land. So for us to be able to value that residence at a market value, we need some clarity. What is the intent? Where are we going with that? How do we get that disclosed? I think most of the others have already been talked about. We had concern over the ownership language, that ownership or when the responsibility for payment changes, the trusts, those issues were paramount to us. And then, of course, going back to 2019 and the word shall was a concern for us. Because in some places, they haven't went up 5% per year in some jurisdictions across the state. So that was a concern. I think that when we talk about substantial improvement, I've heard a lot of discussion this morning about substantial improvement. And I want to use an example, sort of like Senator Pappas's, only let's talk about a vacant land that now gets developed. They put a house out. They don't buy the house. They bought the land, or they got the land given to them, and there's a house on it. Is the intent of this legislation that it would never be taxed until it's sold? I'll do it whichever way you all put into law, but I need that side rails. I need that clarification. When those things happen, we have to deal with that. And the same thing when they add a new shop or they add a new building, or the current statute allow that when a property sells, they have to do the statement of consideration, but there's about 13 exemptions that allows them to not report the sales price. What do we do in those cases? We just need some clarification. So that's a few of the details. I'm available to answer any questions. Mel is with me. If you have any questions, we would stand for those questions.
All right. Any questions? Yes, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Huxtable, for being here. Madam Assessor, I would like to know if you could describe to me if it's possible to look at the previous assessment before a sale, look at the assessment value based on land and on improvements, and then carry that into that percentage, if you will, into the new evaluation. Could that be done?
Ms. Huxtable?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, I suppose it could be done. I'm not sure how our system would handle that. It may take some programming. I'm not sure how that would work. Could it be done? Probably. I don't know where the uniformity and the equity comes in, but maybe we're taking uniformity and equity out of the equation by going to acquisition. So could we take a previous value and prorate, if I understood you correct, prorate the land and the improvements and then apply that to the new purchase price to establish the land? It could be done, but I need some clarity that that's what the intent is.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think you understand exactly what I'm saying. And obviously, we'd be looking at improvements and everything else. As you mentioned, improvements would come into such a discussion. If you hadn't evaluated improvements all those years and then you had a sale, you couldn't prorate that. So we'd have to keep the improvements in there. But what I'm trying to get at is we need to look for solutions if we're going to really have reform in our taxing system. And I'm just trying to throw an idea out there and see if it's feasible. And I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable and Ms. Schinkel for being here. Couple of questions. I'm always thinking about unintended consequences when we make such a radical change as this. And this is a bill that, a process that only California passed. I actually happened to be in school in California at the time. It was on the ballot, and I remember it quite well. And there have been a lot of unintended consequences of that in terms of making it harder for young people to get into a home, keeping older people in their homes where that's valuable, but it's also makes it more difficult because they're having an incentive to stay in their homes because of the process. And I do believe that this would throw out the equal and uniform requirements that are in Article 15, Section 11, at least as far as I can see. The other thing that it would seem to be really a question for Ms. Schinkel, that the unintended consequences in our community in Teton County, where this would be a significant tax break for many of our wealthier citizens who have very valuable homes. And it would seem to me that that would possibly create even more of an incentive for what is clearly a global demand for homes in our valley, making it that much harder for young people and pushing the value of lands and properties up even higher. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Schinkel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, yes, I do think that that is an unintended consequence of capping. I think there may be a flush at the beginning of, higher values, because certainly I have instances in Teton County in particular where some of the super high value homes are undervalued. And so certainly within the first couple of years of those going to a full acquisition cost, yeah, there might be an influx. But I think going forward, and in particular, speaking to the younger generation, I certainly, the older generation needs the targeted relief. But also, it's no secret Wyoming's losing a lot of our young people. And that may make it more difficult for them as well, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, anybody else? Thank you, ladies. Good information, appreciate it. Representative. Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan Slagle, Weston County, representative for House District 2. I am in favor of this acquisition property bill that you've got before you. I would agree with Mr. Just lost his name, the Farm Bureau guy. Anyway, his deal on page 3, that we need to do, rather than just increase by 5% per year, we need an index on that. And I would throw out possibly the percentage would be even lower than 5%, maybe 2 or 3% as a cap on that. And then also, I would also agree with that, the deal talking about getting rid of substantial improvement part of this bill. The thing I see with substantial improvements, if we tax substantial improvements, we as a legislature are penalizing people from improving their properties. They've already paid tax on all the materials they're using in making those improvements. And then we add another tax on because they've improved their place. I feel that's wrong that we do that. And so I think we're better off not taxing an improvement until they sell that improvement. And then the state can realize the gain from that improvement that they've made. Otherwise, we're de-incentivizing people to make improvements on their property unless they're planning to just keep them forever and ever, and most people don't. And then one other thing I thought, we talked about, like Senator McEwen said, basically, we've all become socialists. We all want the government to do stuff for us. And so that's why we're always worried about raising taxes so the government can do more for each of us. But we can cut cost, going back to Senator McEwen's comment, by doing this acquisition value, because the process for the assessors will be simpler. They've got a base for their property. They don't have to go out every year, every couple of years and reassess everything and make calculations. So they won't need as much staff in their offices. And so I think that's really, an advantage to this whole deal of having acquisition value as our basis for assessing value. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Slagle? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your comments, Representative Schlegel. You're right on track on what we're thinking about up here, at least what I'm thinking. These added improvements it's just you're punishing people to do improvements. I mean, it's going to encourage them to do more. I mean, we'll get more sales tax out of that. I mean, if you want more sales tax, we're getting everybody, 6 days to Sunday on these taxpayers. I mean, everybody should be mad. I'm mad. I mean, everybody seen this sheet right here 6 years ago? We're up 80% on our property tax collections in this state. I mean, the people are getting, I don't want to use the words I'd like to use, but they're getting tortured here in Wyoming. We need to do something about it, and we need to start finding places to do this. So thanks for your comments. It's good to hear from you, Senator Schlegel, or Representative Schlegel.
Representative?
Thank you. One other comment I had, it was brought up that, personal property be an issue if we go to this acquisition value. I guess my thought is maybe we need to take personal property out, because I've heard instances of people, the assessor comes by their garage and their garage door is open, and all of a sudden there's a whole list of stuff that goes on their property tax, maybe tools that haven't worked for years on their shelf, and they're getting taxed. And I wonder if we don't need to consider taking personal property out of this, or taking it so we're not taxing it.
We had a bill for that a couple of times. That's a different story, though. Okay, anybody else? No, thank you. Question? Senator McEwen.
When I bring that bill again, you want to co-sponsor it with me?
I sure will. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative. Ms. Lone, welcome back.
Senator Reitman, Chairman and Representatives. I just wanted to add on something I wasn't going to come and talk. Pardon me?
Can you introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, yes, I'm Susan Lone. I'm a precinct person in 411. I live on the south side. And I just wanted to mention something that happened in the past that the lady brought up behind me. She talked about this, special district thing. Well, we went through that. And there was a fire district thing. We had, I think it was 217 people actually decided for, we had around 6,000 at that time. I went to many of my neighbors, not one person was notified. We actually got, on the day of the voting, 2 information packets on it. And, then a bill was presented, I believe it was by Representative Stivar, to say that we couldn't do these special, voting times on off years. And it passed. The next year, it was repealed. And so I just want to say that, again, we're seeing the same thing happen. And we never really had a chance, I don't think, to check that out. And so I just thought it was a good thing that they should have to notify us. We're just working with our annexation situation. They don't have to notify us. They can just come in and do it. If our property is surrounded by 70% or 75%, they can annex us into the city. We will get no extra benefits. We will pay many more taxes because we have to do roads and everything else, sidewalks, all that. And so I think it's necessary that these organizations, that the entities contact the people and have a way so that people can know that they need to go out and vote. That's just my comment, so.
Ms. Sloan, do you support the acquisition value bill or?
I honestly, I will tell you, I don't know enough about it. I don't think I've studied it enough. So I can see the value in it, but right now, I think the petition that's going around the state is probably much better than this. And if we could get that on the ballot and let the people decide, I think that would be excellent.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sloan? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Just really quick, Chairman Beitman, Cindy Barlow again, Johnson County taxpayer, Wyoming native. I just wanted to clarify some of the things about, as you heard the assessors testify, how complicated the system is, how complicated it sounded. Even with being a former assessor, I can tell you 1 over 1 and under 1 sounded complicated to most people just trying to understand a purchase price. We talk about being able to find the old values in the CAMA system. It's a brilliant system. It is time stamped. Every single change that you make by date is in there. It's easily accessible. And with a little bit of help, that information, I believe, is available, but would best probably come from our director of the Department of Revenue, Brenda Henson, who's here today, could probably testify to that. Make Wyoming full disclosure. Since when should a taxpayer have to sign a piece of paper to get the sales prices and have a misdemeanor on their tail if they share that information when they can get that from a realtor? Make us full disclosure. There's no reason that the taxpayer who has to pay for the attorney to fight the appeal, have the county commissioners have an attorney, and yet they're paying the entire bill for this entire process that's stacked against them to begin with. And now we have a misdemeanor on our tail if we get our sales prices and have to sign disclosure to get them. We create a tremendous amount of work for ourselves and for our offices that cost us money. Make this simple. Let's simplify. As far as the ag values, they're already valuing the residential parcel. That was the piece of legislation that came out. Those ag values on the residential portion of an ag sale are already sitting in the system. They had to define them by 1 acre parcels, or however they vary throughout the counties. Look at them. The vacant land scenario, where if we would have paid for an acquisition study, we would have answers to this information today, and we wouldn't have to wonder about the scenarios that we're listening to of what if and how. We had $48,000 to get this study for us today, and we do not have it. I think that's a shame. That's my taxpayer dollars now being wasted because of the information that was available was not shared. I find that egregious and fraudulent. And is anybody going to do anything about that? Or are we just going to say, well, that's the way we operate in Wyoming? I find it terrible, mediocre work, and we need to do better by the people. I stand for any questions. Oh, one last. Uniformity and equality. Read the Constitution. Initially, that was by the tax rate. If everybody is taxed at the same rate, you are uniform. You are equal. Our Constitution was put there to protect us to begin with, and we're playing with fire. When are we going to quit this? As far as radical change, when we see radical changes like tax reform, I can tell you that I have seen taxpayers' property taxes go up 300%. I've seen them higher than that. I've seen them in Teton County to the level that just baffle me. And that they may just seem a little hot to some, but they're egregious takings. What do we find as being radical when next year with no cap, with no solution, we have an even bigger problem on our tail. And yet this problem has been going on for a long time. And what do? Instead of paying attention to the Constitution, we simply amend the Constitution like we did in 1988. Where is that not acceptable? So radical would be doing nothing. I stand for questions.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Barlow? Thank you for your comments. Appreciate you. All right, is there anybody else in the room that wishes to testify? Okay. Oh, sorry. And if you do want to speak and you know you're going to speak, come on up and fill the chair so we can keep this moving along. So we don't have that long dramatic pause while everybody's working their way up. So go ahead and introduce yourself, sir, to the committee. I don't think your microphone's on. It should be green. Okay.
Where's the?
I think it's on now.
It's working now, just.
Okay.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
Now we can hear you, sir.
There's a point here that I haven't heard yet. There's a lot of very good points, but I'd just like to give you my view, which I think I represent a lot of people. Wyoming's a very high retirement people's state because it's a good place to retire. And we moved here about 23 years ago, bought a house, paid a little over 100 grand for it. The house is built in the 50s, so it's pretty old. And without me doing anything as far as improvements other than maintenance, the house keeps getting older and the value keeps going up. You don't find many cars or anything else that way, and it's why does the value keep going up? Because somebody else sells their house for a higher value than what I paid for mine. And as you talk about property tax, especially for older people, our income isn't going up, but our taxes are going up and our house maintenance is going up. So I just wanted to bring that point to you. I think this bill is too ambiguous to even consider right now. That leaves out a lot of people. And I would ask you to consider a different approach to taxes, and like the senator mentioned, maybe even slow down the spending some. I realize we have to have property tax for amenities, fire and police and road maintenance and so on, but our property tax pays for a lot of things that I don't use and a lot of people don't use. So I just ask you to consider those things as you're considering this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your thoughts. Any questions? Thanks for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Mr. Miller? Meyer? Sorry. Pat?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Hirschman, members of the committee, I'm Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. Just wanted to clarify a few things. I haven't been looking at the acquisition bill that much, but I have looked into it since I just received it like Thursday or something. So anyways, I want to go over each one of these classes just a little bit. I'll try not to take too much time, but let's first go into the definition of what fair market value is. It means the amount in cash or terms reasonably equivalent to cash a well-informed buyer is justified in paying for a property, and a well-informed seller is justified in accepting, assuming neither party in the transaction is acting under undue compulsion, and assuming the property has been offered in the open market for a reasonable time. So that's where we are. Now let's talk about personal property, because you're talking about buying that. Now, personal property, you must remember, here's how it gets valued. First, it's reported by the taxpayer what they paid for it. It should include shipping and installation. So if a restaurant gets a new stove, that should all be in there. It should be, but, people just report it. So, and we don't have time to go after anybody. But anyways, so what I'm saying is personal property isn't really at fair market value anyways. We trend it up with a national trending and we depreciate it down. The way this bill reads right now, when you buy it, you're not going to get your depreciation off the personal property. Personal property depreciates quick, all the way down to 80%. A computer in 3 to 5 years, it's depreciated all the way down, whether you're using it or not. So there's the problem. Personal property should be kicked out of this because it doesn't make any sense. Now, the way we value it, the Supreme Court says this is okay. And they list all these cases down, and I can always furnish you with this information. It's really easy to find. But in all the cases that went to court, to the Supreme Court, this court has consistently required only a rational method, equally applied to all property, which results in essential fairness. So don't talk about fair market value in that. You're also talking about acquisition on commercial property. That could be a problem. I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, you probably know a lot about this. We just had a restaurant bar selling Cody, $1.3 million. Nothing really special, but that's only for the business. No trade. He didn't get the property with it. The other guy keeps the property. So, and if he did buy the property and the business together, how much for the real estate? That would be a problem right there too. Residential, maybe not as much, but you still got to have a limit. I mean, to stop this. And I don't agree with adding to your house on the cases we have. The whole thing on the last property tax, the cap bill that we heard in October, was to make sure you didn't have the one guy paying this for the same house, the other guy's paying that. So we were able to, and maybe you could with this too. I'm not sure how to do it with this one, but when you sell your house, and we were using Arizona, you don't go directly to market value. You study like houses and you find what their taxable rate was, what their limited tax purchase is, not your fair market value. So you never go there. And you might catch up someday if if it crashes, yes, you would. You'd catch up to market value because market value could never be lower than that. But to do acquisition, and for instance, California in 2020, they tried to get rid of it for commercial property. They would have gotten, it was called Prop 15 instead of 13. It failed, but they would have got 2.5 billion to 4.5 billion annually just for the schools, and another 10.3 billion and 12.6 billion of revenue to the municipalities. So if you do decide to go to acquisition, remember, you're stuck with it then. Because no voters are going to go out of that. They want their house to stay right where it is. So I just wanted to make that clear. And also on personal property, there was a example of a residential. We do not tax residential personal property, only commercial, including our farmers. Sorry, Tim. They get it too, but we don't do any personal property for residential property, except for mobile homes are residential. And they're probably not at market value either because we don't get sales on personal property. So you really can't analyze anything to get to what they would sell for. And there's too many different kinds. So I believe the courts, and we did make 178 million off personal property last year in the state. That's annually, that's a lot of money to give up. But as we had a bill, I think Mr. Beitman, our co-chairman Beitman might remember it. We did have at one time $35,000 exemption off everybody's industry, anybody's. we would have lost over 60% of our people, commercial property owners, would not have to even report, because I had all the state's data. They would not, it was so far away from ever catching 35,000, and it would have still been in there. So that's a bill somebody ever wants to take on again. We'd have lost that. So we basically, at that time in 2019, we had 38,000 personal property accounts. 6,000 of those accounts were paying for 96% of the value. So all these other people, I mean, we got rid of the dollar ones or the $5 ones we were doing every year. But, you know, we had that one, it was 2,400, not 35,000, but it got rid of anybody paying only $15 or less. And I still think they have to report in most counties, because anybody can go over 2,400, 35,000 is quite a bit. So with that, I think I'd stand for any questions.
Co-chairman?
Assessor Meyer, I appreciate your work on all this. I guess my question is, you know, the cap bill that we forwarded at our last meeting and this bill, can you have both these bills? And I guess it's going to come down to choose. The way I see it is probably no, but I'd like to hear it from you. I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think you can have them both. I think you're going to have to pick one or the other. As far as I can see, I agree with Ms. Barlow on the non-disclosure thing, but you know how many times we've tried to get the disclosure thing through? I mean, at least in the last 13 years since I've been on revenue, I know it was done twice. We've never been able to do it in previous years. It was on there a lot. We can't seem to do it, but again, the assessors will have the value. We still get the price and the values. You know, I don't know if you went to acquisition, you know, there's probably other things, but there's always seem to be cheaters that are going to figure a way, no matter what we're on. They're going to say in acquisition, if you got cash, you're probably not going to put the right price down. It happens. It happens in the rest of the country as well, you know. So it's just something to think of. I don't have anything against acquisition. I do with commercial and personal property. Agricultural, they're really, I mean, to get rid of any kind of appraisal system, you're not going to have them fair. I'm still in the fair and equal. I just wanted to stop these increases, which is the main thing that is killing us. And I don't think you want to go with a 5% automatic increase on that too, because that's not your work. I mean, I still think we're on the right track with that bill, but I respect the idea of this one. But California is California. So
They're all coming here. All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer, is acquisition in your mind, is it doable in Wyoming?
Not in my mind. No.
And why?
Why? It's certainly not doable to everything. It could be it's because of the inequities. The inequities it's not right in my mind for a person with the same house paying that much money less than the new guy and taking that kind of burden. So that's the main thing I have against it.
Okay. Question, Representative Locke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And kind of a quick question on the automatic increase, the 5% increase. So is it accurate to say you'd be in favor more of something to the effect of some cap, up to some cap, or maybe and against some reasonable index and some cap? So for example, put some index in place and then put a cap amount, say no more than this based on this index. Something like that would make sense to you?
Mr. Meyer?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, it's a possibility, but again, you're definitely gone from fair market value, even your acquisition cost. And you're definitely, even index, you got to remember, cost is not market value. In Park County, you build a brand new house, we have exactly what you paid for the lot, and we still have to put an adjustment on your house to get to market because they're getting more than what it costs to build them.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple more questions. I'll lump them together to make it quick. So thank you for your definition of fair market value. So when you defined fair market value, that sounded like fair market value and acquisition cost sound like the same thing at acquisition time. And my second question is, you say that there's lots of unintended consequences in California and they're against it. Is it accurate to say that the California government's against it, but the people want to keep it in place? Is that accurate to say?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, the vote was very close. So the people were very close to getting this vote. You know, it was 48 to 52%. That's how close it was to get that. And yes, it is I guess it is the government because the people voted it down. But I'm just saying, if you decide it's not working later, you'll have a hard time getting it because the people in California do like it. Who wouldn't? Your taxes aren't going up. You know, they go up 2% in California, you know, per year, which is nice. You know, you can count on it. I was always for a limit of the increases so people could actually budget for it. You know you're not going up there. And if the market starts to go down, that's even better. And I don't believe we need that money. And in answer to Senator McCown's thing of government spending, again, remember, there are two different kinds of systems in the United States, a fixed rate system that Wyoming's on and a budget-based system. So it wouldn't matter if you cut as much government spending as you want, it doesn't matter. Your taxes are staying the same. You're going up the same because you're not on a budget-based system. If you want to get on a budget-based system, you need tax policy experts and you need to form a committee. And that's going to take you guys a lot more time than any of these bills to do. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Any questions down this way? Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the difference between fixed and budget-based. But even if we're fixed, why can't we as a legislature cut the percentage, the amount of taxes? Well, you say taxes have to stay the same because we're fixed. But if I charge you less taxes, is it really fixed? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator McCown. All I'm saying is the schools, you'd have to fix that first of all, because they're 70% of our taxes in most counties, and they get the maximum mills. So you can't cut the mills down for sure. The county gets 12 mills to run on. Some counties are cutting the mills down, but you know, their valuations are also $4 billion. So it doesn't take much to cut in those counties to cut the mill levy down. You got to remember we'd have to fix the oil and gas, the mineral production, because mineral production, once it's gone, you're not going to get that money again. So when you cut a mill or two, you lose a lot of money coming out of the ground. You know, whether you need it or not, you only got one chance to ever get it, and then it's gone. So cutting mills is really hard. Cutting the rates, it's per jurisdiction, you know? I mean, budget base is exactly that. It's jurisdiction. It's not statewide like Wyoming is stuck with, you know? It is something that maybe you guys want to go, but even budget-based states have problems as well, too. Don't think we'd be fixing everything. And they also have caps in their systems for the increases, but they have a lot better ways of lowering values, especially if you're flush.
Would you agree that the fees we charge are another form of taxes? And we set those fees? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what fees you're doing, but yes, that's another form of taxes, of course. Yes.
Okay. Committee, we good? All right, thank you, Mr. Meyer.
You bet.
Ms. Saban, right?
Saban, yes, sir.
Saban. Thank you.
Rosemary Saban, Nechona County resident. First of all, before I get going on some of these notes, I'd like to say that I appreciate the change in the schedule because I did drive down from Casper to attend this on my own time, my own dollar. And I'd like to thank you guys for removing the constitutional amendment out of there, that section 3 thing said that it had been voided. Is that correct?
Oh, you're referencing Bill 318.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you.
Mhm.
I am disappointed that this is the best bill that we have because it clearly needs some more work. The study was very disappointing as I testified in Casper. You guys all know that I have 1,825 people supporting acquisition through my petition. How many people here in this room, if you don't mind, if you're not going to speak publicly, support acquisition? A show of hands. The refund program, that's not a solution. That's taxation without representation, as I stated in Sheridan. You're just taking money from the people and doling it back out, and then there's a lot of people that don't qualify. Keeping the prices low on taxes, like it's been said a few times here. There's really not a lot for me to say because everybody said everything really well today. But I do want to stand behind the people that said that keeping the prices low on taxes, it does incentivize people to purchase and to build, make improvements. And when it does sell, then they can you guys, the state profits from that. But we're talking about county and how I will bring this up because some of you know that I like to go banter with my local county commissioners. And there was a subsidy given to Delta Airlines, $1,343,494. That was for a 6-month period. There was $240 million for a solar farm that's being subsidized, and that's just locally around Casper. $241,343,494 total to the subsidies for the airline and the solar. If you were to divide that out by the population of Nechona County, 80,000 roughly, that's $3,016, $3,016.80 that in additional, and that's not an accurate representation because that's just going off the internet and the population of Nechona County. That's, not figuring for the adults. So is there places to cut spending in all of our government? Of course. I believe so. Where the people, it was being mentioned, the people in California that it narrowly didn't pass or to stay in effect. How many people just listen to what the government says and people around them, unknowing they don't know what's going on? I mean, how many people are here today? How many people turned out in Casper? I don't think that's a fair assessment to say that the people of California, are starting to lean toward not wanting acquisition. I think this is what we have. I'm not saying that there's not a better solution in the future, but right now it's the best thing that we have. And we've elected all of you to be our representatives and to do a job for us. And the people of Wyoming are telling you that they need relief. We can't afford it. I can't see how any of you guys can afford it. So I'm asking all of you guys to work together, both sides, both parties, both ideas, work together as our legislators and get a job done. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Any questions? I have a question for you. So on this bill in particular, obviously, I share your frustration with what we got back from that study. on acquisition value. It wasn't exactly what we had in mind. And you said this bill is kind of not quite there yet either. Is this bill worth moving forward, or do we need to go back to the drawing board? Is it worth salvaging at this point?
I'd hate to be the one to make that call. I know that we need acquisition. I don't know if it's very ambiguously written right now. It's just so loose and airy. I don't know the process, sir. So I can't say whether you can salvage this and move ahead or whether you start over. If that, I like quality over quantity. That's so however is going to be best for the people, and that we can get it done in a time frame that's going to matter, and not 2 to 4 years from now.
Questions? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Huxtable, come on up. Or we have somebody else, come on. The more the merrier. Thank you. Welcome,
Senator
sir.
Brightman, representatives, my name is Steve Milia. Thank you for having me here. I'm a resident of Laramie County. And not to go over everything else that other people said, you've heard it all. I would like to say that I agree, especially with the lady that was just here, keeping taxes low, cutting some spending. I sort of get the idea that I'm actually renting my house from the legislature. I don't really own it because the taxes go up. And if I don't get the taxes paid, then I would have to sell my house to pay the taxes. So I'm going, do I really own my house or am I renting it? So not to belabor any points, I would just like to say that I agree with the lady that was before me and those people that have the same perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you say your last name again? I didn't
Oh,
get you.
Melia, Melia.
Got it. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Melia? Thank you for your comments, sir. Okay. Ms. Henson. Director, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, co-chairman, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. And we've talked about a lot today. As the agency that's responsible for providing the hardware, the software, appraisal education, promulgating rules for the property tax structure in the state of Wyoming, I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up some of the items that I believe that if we don't address them, unfortunately, will be litigated. And I believe that that's the worst form of creating property tax structure, is to leave items not clear because lawyers will question those in court. And that takes a long time. And it creates an uneasy and frustrating system for taxpayers. So with that, so taxpayers in general, as you all know, most taxpayers are willing and want to pay their fair share of the tax burden. They recognize their property tax dollars go to educate our children, to provide for services, to maintain our streets, to provide someone at the counter to get a marriage certificate. All of those things that we require as citizens of the state of Wyoming, of government. But what they are also very, very concerned about is, how are my taxes being calculated compared to my neighbor's taxes? Believe me, those citizens that you represent are just as concerned about how the property across the street is valued as they are their own. So that's important to note. So as we talk about this proposed legislation with the acquisition value, I'm just going to pose some questions that really are intended to be just that. As a taxpayer, how would you want these answered? I always go back, after 30 years of administering taxation, I always say, what's simple isn't necessarily fair, and what's fair isn't necessarily simple. And it takes a lot of research and knowledge to answer these questions. So keep that in mind. So both of these bills are applicable to the all other class, and we've already discussed that really this proposed legislation that all of us were just able to see a few days ago goes much further than what the House Bill 100 in the 2023 session had the study look at. The study was specific to residential. This is expanding it to commercial, both real and personal property. And because of that, some of the language in this bill has some very far-reaching effects. So one of the topics that has been discussed is that by providing acquisition value as a basis for taxation, it would simplify the job of the assessor's office. But I want you to consider a few things based on the language in this bill. You have a base value that is either an acquisition value, sale price, or that 2019 base value that we're going back to. So to implement this as written, the first thing the assessor is going to have to do is determine, has the ownership changed on that parcel since 2019? And believe me, some of them have changed multiple times since 2019. The other thing they're going to have to research is any changes to that property. This bill requires that you make adjustments for those changes. So if you want to eliminate that, that's a possibility. It's just not how it's written right now. If you had a property that has not changed, it's exactly in the same format as it was in 2019, and it's maybe not changed hands since then, the implementation of this system would be fairly easy. But I will tell you, every day properties change. And not only do they change ownership, property characteristics, but they also change in that they're replatted. You've got new subdivisions that were platted in 2021, and now you've got a bill that says you're going to either use acquisition value. Does that mean what the developer paid when they bought that half section of ground before they ever put any infrastructure in? Because now it's changed again. Now I've got 25 property owners. And what value, where are we going to start as an assessor? What does the legislature want them to start at for those parcels that exist in 2025? Just some other pieces. Personal property changes every year based on the renditions that the taxpayers provide. So the question here is that is what they purchased it for, because they report that now, that piece of equipment, the declaration states I bought this piece of equipment the year I bought it and what I paid for it. Is that now sale price on that piece of personal property? And should that then stay in place until it sells again? Because as stated previously, currently we do depreciate that property. The other piece that we need to look at is the properties that changed hands. The ownership has changed, but there was no money that exchanged hands. The example of the trusts, the example of the wills, the example of I'm going to donate this property to this worthy cause that I believe. And you know, what is that amount then? So do we leave that property that has changed hands at that 2019 value? Or is the assessor supposed to do something else with that? The current system of collecting sales information is not sufficient to be utilized as a basis for taxation. That was very clear in the study results. Will there be creative reporting of sales price? Because now my property taxes for the foreseeable future are going to be based on it. And is there a possibility, if we don't revamp that collection of sale price, is there a possibility that I acquire the property for $1 million, but I'm going to deed it to my wife and my husband for $200,000? And should that be recognized as that new base for property taxation? I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm just telling you that these are the types of situations that if we aren't clear in this legislation, they're either going to be litigated or challenged. The bill indicates costs of constructions defined by the legislature. So we have a current system that looks at the building components. Is it is that structure brick? Is it siding? 2-story, 3-story, 1-story? Does it have a finished basement? Our current structure has a different cost for all those things. This bill says it's a 1 per square foot cost determined by the legislature. There's been a suggestion that perhaps the Department of Revenue could figure that out. So are you going to have a per square foot cost of that 12 by 10 shed that is the same per square foot cost as the home that a builder is charging $400 per square foot for? How do we address that and look our taxpayers eye to eye and make sure that they're being treated fairly? Real property may be adjusted for inflation as determined by the legislature, and I read that that's the 5% that's being proposed, but there's no such adjustment for personal property. We do know that most commercial property, when it changes hands, it changes. If I buy a commercial structure, I usually go in there and I remodel it to the use that I have in mind. Very few commercial properties just stay the same. So how do we address that in this structure? We have absolutely zero mechanism in place for determining sale price for mobile homes. Titles are recorded, but we don't collect sale prices on mobile homes. So that's something that needs to be addressed. Let's see, multiple parcels. Right now, when a deed is recorded in the county clerk's office, there's one statement of consideration that accompanies that deed. Very often, you have multiple legal descriptions on one deed. So this current mechanism that we've got for collecting sale price is not going to lend itself well to the situation where I have just deeded 4 different parcels with 4 different legal descriptions and possibly 4 different subdivisions, because I've got one statement of consideration that tells me what that purchase price was under current law. The conflicting statutes related to ownership and the responsibility of payment of tax. Right now, property is taxed and assessed as it exists January 1 of each year. If the property changes ownership after that date, there's a statute specific that talks about that being a contractual arrangement between the buyer and seller. Your county assessors don't get involved in that process. And if on January 5th, that 60 acres was just platted into 6 10-acre parcels, that isn't recognized until the next tax year. So we just need to ensure that we make sure that there's that consistency in statute. That's already been identified that our Constitution requires the assessor to separate out a land value and an improvement value, and the challenges that will be faced with that. The other piece, the 5% that shall be applied to the base value. So when we implement using a 2019 value, does that mean that the assessor then should apply the 5% in the bill that's proposed for 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, to ultimately be at 2025 when this law is implemented? Or are we just talking taking a 2019 value and just applying it once when we implement in 2025? Just some clarity there that I believe would be beneficial. There's a provision in here for minor construction defined as a % of the total value of the property. How are we determining that? If we're getting away from using the characteristics of the property as a basis for property taxation and substituting just a total acquisition value, what is that percent of total value of property? Where's the math? Just to provide clarity. Again, please don't take any of these questions as my trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to say, how are you going to have assessors answer those questions when the taxpayers are at the counter? Currently, the CAMA system is not capable of administering an acquisition value basis. We're a fair market value state, have been since the late 1980s, and there's going to need to be some significant programming that needs to be done. But I believe that the questions to the answers that you've heard today need to be answered before I can even ask my vendor what the cost is going to be to make the changes to the program to track this. I wanted to also note that during the next biennium, we have a lot on our plate at the Department of Revenue. We will be moving from an Oracle-based CAMA database to a SQL database and moving the CAMA system to a cloud-based environment. We hope to have all of that done no later than June of 2026. So that will also be on our plate as we move towards any statutory changes that affects the basis of our system. As I stated, the legislature and those responsible for administering tax laws want to be sure that our laws are clear, not only to the people that have to administer those, but to the taxpayers. And I believe litigation is not the preferred answer to these questions. We should start with the acquisition value study. It may not have all of the answers because it didn't consider personal property and it didn't consider commercial property. It only looked at residential property. While it may not have provided all the answers, let's at least start there and implement, because I believe that this legislation has not answered just the questions that were in the acquisition value study. So let's start there. But I do believe that we need to make sure that the legislative intent is clear before we implement such a major change. And I do want to ensure everyone recognizes this is not a mechanism for tax relief. This is simply changing the basis of our property tax structure. And so as testified today, we still have the residents, the voters of the state of Wyoming still have the right to tax themselves. Does there need to be better notification, obviously, based on the testimony, perhaps, for those votes? But I don't believe that it's the legislature's intent to take away those rights from property owners. That's what taxes are. Taxes are how we as citizens pool our resources to pay for things that we couldn't pay for on our own, whether that means paving a street or paying for a hospital ambulance, so many different things that our taxes pay for us. So with that, I would encourage this committee to reach out to county treasurers and ask that question of how many properties statewide have had a tax deed. Meaning, how many properties really went up and were sold for the liens that were placed for a lack of payment of property taxes. I think you'd be surprised to know the minimum number, but that needs to come from your county treasurers. So with that, the department, as always, we stand ready to work with this body, to look at all these questions, to get your thoughts on how this should be rolled out. As I stated, we've got to promulgate rules, and we want to make sure that the legislative intent is clear, because I don't want to be in a situation where the State Board of Equalization states that I overstepped my authority when the Department of Revenue promulgated a rule to answer a question on how to administer these taxes. So with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for Director Hinson? I have one. You mentioned the need for multiple statements of consideration. Is that something that could be done by rule through your department, or would we need to make that a statutory change, and that would have to be an amendment to the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's an excellent question. The statements of consideration come under the guise of the State Board of Equalization, and they promulgate rules and they put the format of that statement consideration in place. So definitely they could look at that. But I do believe in Title 34 is where the statute related to the gathering of sales information. And as stated, there are multiple situations where you don't have to disclose the sale price. So I think it's important that this body look at Title 34 and the gathering of the statements of consideration.
And a follow-up to that would be, so if we change to a disclosure state, would that get rid of the need for a statement of consideration altogether? If we just went full disclosure?
Mr. Chairman, so when you state full disclosure, that means that the information that has been reported to a governing entity, whether it be the local county assessor's office or, the statement of consideration right now goes to the county clerk when a deed's recorded. That just means that that information is now public. You still have to have a mechanism to gather that information, but I would say that there needs to be more guidelines, and if our property tax structure is solely going to be based on the information provided on that document, there needs to be some consequence for erroneous reporting. Otherwise, I think you're going to have a very frustrated taxpayer.
Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Henson, for being here. You know a lot about this stuff. You've given us more landmines to consider, obviously. We all recognize there is landmines out there. Change is messy. Status quo isn't working right now. The taxpayers are getting taken to the woodshed, and the government agencies, schools, towns, and counties, it appears they're looking like they're getting pretty fat right now. These came from the Department of Revenue. We've collected $1 billion more in the last 6 years in property taxes than, went from what, 1.2 million that we collected in 2017 to almost 2.2 billion in 2023. The status quo is out of balance. I mean, something's got to give. And I understand, appreciate all your comments here, but change is going to be hard. And, if you need temporary help to structure things, if we go down a different path, I think we need to do something here. So thank you for your testimony.
Ms. Henson?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, I really appreciate your bringing up the points about the increased values statewide. I think it's important to stop and think about how all taxing entities are not created equal in any way, shape, or form. If we look at the 12 mills for the school foundation, that's the only levy that is a statewide levy. And when you look at the state's assessed value and you look at 28% of it is from residential, and you've got over 50% that is from the mineral production. It's important to note that that mineral production, 78% of it is in 4 counties: Campbell County, Converse County, Sweetwater County, Sublette County. The other counties are not seeing that increased tax amount within their jurisdiction. And if you go even further and look at the municipalities, the cities and towns, they definitely are not seeing those assessed values in their tax base. They are definitely more reliant. In fact, statewide, you're looking at 65%-ish on residential value. And so anytime we change that residential tax structure, it is your cities and towns that are going to see the biggest hit because they didn't see the increases with minerals and they're not going to see the decrease with minerals when they go down. So it's just recognizing this tax structure we have is not a one size fits all, and general statements are really misleading.
Yeah, co-chairman.
Just to follow up kind of on that last conversation between the director and Senator Wright, at 1.2 to 2.2, that includes minerals, right? That's not Senator Wright, is that right?
Yeah, that's total.
Okay, so that, okay, very good, thank you.
Okay. Are we done with Director Henson? Anybody have any more questions before we let her go? For now, we'll have her back shortly. Thank you. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Revenue Committee. Bill Alaman from Midwest. Each one of us who receives a check from the state of Wyoming works for about 600 people or 600,000 people. I know this is going to be a heavy lift, but what we need to do is roll up our sleeves and lift it because these people need relief in taxes. And this is the best bill I've seen come down the road in quite a while. We need to do a little tweaking here and there. Well, quite a little in some places. But the Wyoming way is to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you. Any questions?
Seeing none, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're through with the room. Time for Zoom. Eve, who do we have on Zoom?
We're going to start with Robbie LeBlanc.
All right, Mr. LeBlanc. Good afternoon. Can you hear us okay? Mr. LeBlanc, is he on?
Oh, maybe.
Can you hear me, Chairman?
Hey, there you are. We can hear you now, sir.
Okay. My name is Ronnie LeBlanc. I live in Sheridan, Wyoming. Thank you all for the good job you guys do for us, looking out for Wyoming interests. Mr. Chairman, I've been a Wyoming resident for 23 years. I understand that Wyoming has got a large savings account, about 1.5 billion. That is 1,000.
We might have just lost you, Mr. LeBlanc. Did he cut out? Okay, well, if you can hear us, Mr. LeBlanc, get back on. We'll come back to you. We'll move on to our next Zoomer. Eve, who would that be?
Our next Zoomer actually left, so
That's it?
that would be it.
Okay, well, if Mr. LeBlanc comes back in the next couple minutes, give me a nod. All right. Any more public comment in the room before we close it down? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed unless Mr. LeBlanc gets it back on real quick. Committee, what's your pleasure? Representative Locke.
I'd like to move the bill.
The bill's been moved. Have a second? Second by Bear. Bear beat you to it. Okay. Discussion? Senator French? Oh, wait, looks like we have Mr. LeBlanc back. Maybe, possibly.
I don't know what happened, Chairman, but I punched a few buttons. I think I'm back online.
Okay.
So may I continue, sir?
Yes.
All right, I think that acquisition values would come into play with those who pay too much. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. As far as Representative Storr talking about 8 million for a school, you know, Representative Storr, I've got a heart for people as well. but I don't think it's legislature's responsibility to follow everyone with services. Case in point, if someone chooses to live where no services exist, the responsibility is theirs. Don't you agree? Please consider the number of constituents who spoke against the existing methodology today serves versus those speaking to retain the ad valorem. And with all due respect, I would encourage you all to imagine the political ramifications. You know, if Wyoming is truly a conservative Republican state, we should have the smallest government and the lowest taxes. It appears in enlarging the state savings account, it's getting into my savings account. So I encourage you all to please pass the tax acquisition plus or minus 2%. I think the 5% is too great. In 10 years, there you are, 50%. And lastly, sir, I want to share that the Republican women of Sheridan County, I'm an auxiliary member of that group. I met with them today, more than 100 members in this county, and they approved the recommendation that I just made to you all to please consider passing that tax acquisition. And I respect Revenue Director Henson, but let me share this about her comments. It appears she still wants to tax improvements. We're talking about tax acquisition, not improvements, ma'am. We use the tax acquisition only on the purchases, sales. If the sales price is reduced significantly, that's when the citizens go into action. I'm sorry about plans to change the revenue software, but we need to consider tax relief for Wyoming residents, not be concerned with an inconvenience to government agencies. So with all due respect, madam, thank you for your comments. I urge the entire committee to please pass tax acquisition value. When those properties get sold, the next individual can pay for them. If there are improvements in the meantime, the next individual will pay for them. That's the nature of tax acquisition. Thank you all very much, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Are there any questions? Yeah.
No questions.
No questions? Oh. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. LeBlanc, for joining us today. Sorry about the technical issues.
Thank you, Chairman Beitman.
Okay. Okay, committee, we're back on the bill. Senator French, you had
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Like everybody says, there are a lot of people out there that are desperate for tax relief. Desperate. In my area, it's really gotten out of hand in the Park County area. One concern I have in the bill is if it's in a trust, I think Mr. Moline brought that up. But if a spouse gets it, or, these mom and dad's home has a big emotional attachment to a lot of people. They want to keep mom and dad's home, but mom and dad bought it for $100,000 and suddenly it's $1 million. They may not be able to keep it. And I'd like to speak about the ag community a little bit, because that's kind of my world. Many of these homes that mom and dad started on the farm or the ranch are not on the edge of the property. They may be a quarter of a mile, 5 miles inside the property. So if mom and dad paid $200,000 long time ago, and they pass on and the son or daughter inherits it, and maybe it's $1 million plus, and they can't pay the taxes on it and they have to sell it, then suddenly someone else is in the middle of their operation. That makes a big difference if you're in that community. If you have someone else right in the middle of your operation, they may have 2, 3, 4 dogs, and they're out there chasing your horses, chasing your calves around. It has a major impact on that. So I'd like to see somehow that if somebody inherits it or it's passed down, that they don't have to pay the new higher rate, because it's going to be very disruptive to those operations. It really is. I mean, I know I shouldn't use my personal situation, but our home and shop are essentially in the middle of our operation. Well, if the kids can't handle
that increased value when we pass on and they inherit it or whatever, it's going to be so disruptive. They're going to have to maybe do all kinds of different fencing. It's going to cause arguments. Maybe the new owner, like I said, has dogs that chasing their animals around. The person with the horses that have been chased through the barbed wire fence and all cut up, they have the rifle out and they shoot the dog or shoot a couple of them. That's always been kind of the way of the West out there. That's going to cause major issues. So I just wanted to comment that so everybody would kind of take that into consideration. But we do need relief out there desperately. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any further comments, amendments around the bill? Representative Locke, looks like you have an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. I passed out an amendment for this bill. That's right. So it's amendment for 24 LSO 317. And I can sort of quickly walk everyone through this if that's, if we're ready to go here. So what I did was in an attempt to kind of, in all fairness, when you look at the definition of fair market value, I would argue that fair market value as it is defined is what can be, fair market value is what a fair acquisition it actually is. So, but what I also did in here is I just added fair market value will be of the remainder of all the other property classes shall be determined as provided in this subparagraph. And so we'll talk to that, some changes in this subparagraph. So the bullets below that are related to that subparagraph that you guys will see in 317. Let me make one statement about that. I understand that there are probably some personal property issues that may need to be addressed here. And those are probably very fair and in agreement with Director Hansen. I know there's a lot of details of implementation. That, of course, is why this is pushed out a ways. And I think that was wise of LSO to say, hey, this is going to take some time to get those types of rules put in place and promulgated. So I don't think anyone's going to argue that that is true. It is potentially a heavy lift, but it is something that I think this is less of trying to help people out in the short term. We're looking for some reform that is manageable over a longer window to avoid, the prices creeping up on us. Anyway, sorry, back to my amendment. So looking at 317, if you look at page 3, line 14, instead of it saying, let me look at it again here, sorry. I think the way it states it, am I on the right page? So looking at that line 14, this is where it talks about it shall be increased by 5%. So what we're proposing here is that we insert the lesser of the Consumer Price Index or its successor index of the United States Department of Labor, Bureau of Statistics for the applicable year, and then you would see the percentage. So the lesser of the index or the percentage. So that's the second bullet you see on this amendment. Bullet 3 is page 3, line 14. I am proposing that we change 5% to 3%. I throw that in there from this perspective. Let's use 5% as an example. So 5%, I think you've heard it in testimony. We're looking at 5%, and you're looking at every 14 years, the house of your property taxes double, okay? So at some point, whether it's at 14 years or whether it's somewhere after 14 years, you're talking about people who are paying off their mortgage and their mortgage has now been replaced by their property tax value. So that's sometimes that doesn't affect some, that affects many people, especially people once they get to that age of fixed income. And so I think that's extreme. Because of that, I think we should drop that down to 3%. And then the next bullets after valued, really this change is not significant, but I was trying to respond actually to the, and so that's kind of the next bullets 4, 5, and 6 on this, I think they are. I just wanted to respond and kind of answer the staff comment on there because, and the goal with this was to ultimately, if you look at the last line, it would give, based on the applicable index or evaluation index adopted by the department for the type of substantial improvement. I was just trying to give the department some mechanism to put in place, because as everybody knows, a substantial change. I add on a room to my house is one thing. I add on a deck, it's another thing. You add on a garage, it's a completely different thing. Even finishing your basement is different than adding on a room to your house. So I felt like this was something, I was trying to respond to the staff comment on that one. But what I thought this did is this put this into a bill, at least made some changes that gave us a better framework to work with. So that's the amendment I would propose and that I'm putting out there. And I'd love to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Are there any questions on the proposed amendment? Any questions? Yes, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Locke, I'm kind of on this last one here where you've got page 3, line 23, delete entirely. I'm kind of going down a path of maybe deleting that whole, subparagraph I in that entire, that whole subparagraph I. Would that conflict with your amendment here and with you just deleting line 23 here? Just curious about that. Or if that.
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had considered that, and I certainly am open to considering that if the group feels that's a good step. I think if I could ask for that to be a separate amendment, if that would be acceptable, I would prefer to take that route, if that is an acceptable approach, Mr. Chairman. So
As chairman, I would prefer to go that route. Just keeps it cleaner, so we know what we're voting on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's kind of where I was going, just to
Okay.
not mix apples with oranges here.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay. Any further questions on the amendment, committee? We ready to vote? All right. Seeing lots of enthusiasm up here. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Committee, we're back on the bill. Anybody else? Senator Ide? Oh. Okay, Representative Northrop, go ahead, please.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 4, line 20. No, that's not right. Trying to find my notes. Oh, yes, it is line 20. And after the word ownership, excluding divorce, death of a spouse, and or transfer to a trust. And then say, or responsibility for the payment of taxes. I'm just trying to put in that subgroup into it.
Excellent. Can you repeat that slowly for us slow
Okay.
guys here?
Line 20, page 4. After ownership, say excluding divorce, comma, death of a spouse, comma, and the transfer to a trust.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Committee, any comments? Yes, Senator Pappas.
So the transfer to a trust could be to a completely different entity. I don't
So-
think you want to leave it that wide open.
You're probably right. And
No worries.
sorry, Mr.
Representative?
Chairman, you're probably exactly right. Maybe I should say a family trust.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Again, a family trust, I don't know that we have a definition of a family trust. You're thinking of a trust where some of the members are related to the person that is selling it or is transferring it.
That's correct.
Because there's many different kinds of family trusts out there. And I don't know, and maybe some of that wording can be worked out later on or in addition to it. But maybe for now you could use family trust, but I think that it's way too far reaching.
Yeah, Representative, would a trust or transfer to a trust for the benefit of the current owner's family work for now until we
That'll work for
can
now.
tackle it the next meeting? Okay.
I,
Yes, Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that it be more defined as the beneficiaries of the trust are the owners of the current property rather than the family, because that also kind of leaves it open for transfer.
Does that go too far for you? Or is that,
I'm good with,
you're good with that?
I'm good with that. I think that we'll probably beat it out again after we've thought about it, so.
Yeah. Gives LSOs something to work with for, okay. Yeah, Senator French.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, would you run that by again, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you run that by again?
Sure. Thank
on
you,
the
Senator
trust?
French. Just the idea that you may be putting your assets in a trust, like a revocable trust or something like that. So the idea is that the beneficiaries of that trust should be the same people that are under the ownership, that have the ownership of the property prior to moving it into a trust, essentially. So that it's not really, it is only a transfer of a vehicle for tax purposes or estate planning purposes, which makes sense, but you haven't given it to someone new and transferred it. So that's the idea.
So it takes out the tax avoidance or tax, yeah.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I hate using myself, but that's what I know. So we have a trust that defines where all the assets go to the children. But they're not owners of any of the property at this time. They will be when the trust is implemented. Is that what you're getting to or not? Because they currently don't own any of our land, house, any of our assets. The trust simply states when we pass on that they will be the owners of the assets.
Mr. Chairman. Senator French, I am not an attorney, and I'm probably not the right person to answer that question, but I think we're trying to get at the idea that there isn't a transfer of ownership that could be allowed under this amendment that wouldn't otherwise cause a new acquisition of the property.
Okay. Clear as mud, committee? Any questions? I think it's good. All right. We ready to vote, or do we need more discussion? Okay, question being called. All those in favor of Representative Northrup's amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to propose a third amendment, kind of clean things up a little bit more on the improvements made. I think the best thing to do is just to remove lines 20 through 23, or actually make it simple, remove that subsection I starting on line 20 of page 3, going on to page 4, lines 1, 2, and 3. And I believe when we do that, we're also going to have to delete the last sentence starting in line 21 on page 4 all the way through there. So that's my amendment. I think we've had a lot of discussion today. I won't belabor the reasons why, because I think we've already kind of hashed all of those out. And I think it's the best way to clean this up. I mean, a lot of this, we're picking, a dollar amount on an improvement, and you don't know what kind of improvement that is, and are you using the cost of, a deck or the square footage of the house. And I think this just takes a lot of the ambiguity out of this improvement cost. So thank you.
Okay, it's been moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Senator, do you also you probably need to take out on page 5, paragraph B then, correct? Pages, or lines 1 through 4. The last page. Anyway, it's probably a technical correction.
Yes, correct.
Okay, just. All right, LSO, did you catch that? Okay, they're on board. You have a comment, Senator McEwen?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood what we just did. When we take this section out, that basically leaves the house at a current value until it is transferred again, right? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understood that.
That is correct. That's the point. Okay, any discussion? Any questions? Senator Pappas?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on and against this amendment. I really have a problem pulling out the ability to increase the value of a home by doing these substantial improvements. I've just for a little bit of background, I belong to the Institute for State Policy Leaders. I'm the only one in the state of Wyoming that goes to this organization. And we've been having a tax academy, and I've listened to a lot of people talk about different taxes. We talk about digital taxes, property taxes, sales and use taxes, exemption of taxes. They're even now talking about taxing AI. It's amazing. But I've listened to the property tax conversations that we've had there really closely because of our issues here. And of course, I read the 54-page report that we got from our consultant, who raises a lot of questions going to an acquisition value. And while, as we heard, it may be a radical change, I'm not opposed to radical changes, but I am opposed to radical changes when we don't know what we're doing. Frankly, I don't think this committee or anyone in the state yet knows what we're doing. We're really changing the system, okay? You say we need tax relief. I'm kind of in the same boat that Assessor Huxtable said. This really is not tax relief. This is changing the way we're doing it. Some are going to pay more taxes, some are going to pay less, right? But I'm really concerned with if we do go to this and we pass this, I don't want to fall into the same situation California is falling into. And I know for a fact, because I have a friend who was building a house in Palm Desert. He hired an architect, designed the farm, and then he gave it to me to review just as a friend, give me some advice. And I looked at it, and basically what they did is they bought this property with this old dilapidated house on it. They were going to tear it down and build a new house on it. And now in California, if you can't tear everything down, if you leave one standing bearing wall, then that acquisition value still holds, but they have to leave a wall. So the bare land change wouldn't affect acquisition value. But if there's a bare, and so what they've found in California, people are buying old houses. They tear everything down, they leave a little portion of wall, and then they build a mansion around it. Yet the value is the same as that old dilapidated home. I really see people being able to game this system if we do this. So I don't think we've put enough thought in this. So if we do, I'm opposed to the bill, okay? But if we do go to the acquisition value, we have to somehow be able to keep this value on any improvements that come down the line. Now, maybe you could put a, say 10% or 15% or even 5% of the value And then you can call the rest if you know, a minor improvement. We won't tax that. But if you do something big, like, you know, like what I did, buy a 1,300 square foot house and then end up with 6,400 feet, yet I'm not going to pay any additional tax. It's just not right. The inequities will grow year after year. And I think it was brought up by somebody that, by our director, that somebody down the street, I think it was the director, down the street, is going to look at my property, find out that I'm being taxed half of what they are, even though my house is 3 times as big as they are. And it's just, the inequities are big in this system. And I think that's why you see only California doing this. I really think we need to stay to acquisition value. But as our assessor from Park County mentioned, I think we really need to go on budget-based. And I think that's how we can get a handle on it. But this is just not ready for prime time. There are way too many ambiguities in this bill. You pass it, I know you're going to have big problems down the line. New computer system, for sure. We're going to have additional staff in every assessor's office in the state. We got to amend the Constitution. And then we're going to have to come back and change probably every statute in the state. We're going to have a lot of work to do, and we have not thought about it. This is the first time we've seen this acquisition bill. Anyhow, I'm getting off the amendment, but I really do think that if you decide to pass this bill, which I believe is not ready, if you decide to pass it, I think you still need to leave that portion in there that would allow us to increase the value when actually the structure does increase. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Any further comments on the amendment, proposed amendment? Question being called. All those in favor of, whose was it? Senator Ide's amendment to the bill, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, that amendment has failed. We are back on the bill. Committee?
We're doing division.
You betcha. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Division. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think we're 7-7. All those opposed, raise your hand for formality. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, so a tie. Thank you. Okay, we're back on the bill. Any further amendments on the bill? Question being called. Eve, would you please call the roll?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McCowan,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Byron,
No.
Representative Locke,
Aye.
Representative Northrup,
No.
Representative Oakley,
No.
Representative Storer,
No.
Representative Strzok,
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer,
No.
Co-Chairman Harshman,
No.
and Chairman Beitman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, it is a tie.
It is a tie, so therefore the bill fails to be a committee bill. Okay, committee. Next bill up is 318. Committee, what's your pleasure on 318? Been moved to table. Okay, all those in favor? Non-debatable, so. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that bill has been tabled. Seeing the writing on the wall there. Okay. All right, committee, let's take a quick 15-minute break so we can get ready for the rest of the agenda. And the next item up on our agenda, when we get back from break, we'll pick up where we left off on our agenda, which would be Department of Revenue. So be ready for that. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
15.
Department of Revenue, review of reports. Director Henson and everybody else in the department, come on up. Thank you so much for your patience, and we really appreciate you letting us take care of the acquisition value before you. We really appreciate that.
Good afternoon, Mr.
It is.
Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and with me today I have Craig Grenvik with Mineral Tax Division and also Brett Fanning with the Excise Tax Division. By statute, we've got 5 reports that we need to provide to this committee. We'll start with the mineral tax report, and then we'll go to the excise tax report. But I did want to briefly remind this committee that the reports that Mr. Fanning will be providing to you, those reports are included in the sales and use tax amendment bill that you voted to sponsor during your last meeting. And what that does is repeal the language that requires these reports. But the thought process is that we would look at the reporting mechanism in the interim. So the reason I'm just stating that is as Mr. Fanning goes through these reports, in the back of your mind, I just ask that each of you think about what type of information would you really like to see on these exemptions, and what information do you need to know if you're trying to determine if the exemptions are having the impact that you intend by providing an exemption to those entities. So with that, I will be quiet and hand it over to the experts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee. I'm Craig Grenvik. I'm the Administrator of the Mineral Tax Division. I'm here to give you a report on a piece of legislation that was enacted in 2020 that basically gave the oil and gas producers a severance tax break for incentive to produce during pricing times which were either historically low or very close to it. Basically, there were a number of sideboards and provisions in it. The most important was the pricing mechanism, where the price of oil had to be less than $50 per barrel for the preceding 12 months, according to the West Texas Intermediate benchmark. And the price of natural gas had to be below $2.95 for the preceding 12 months for the Henry Hub natural gas price, which is indexed in Louisiana. You can see the numbers here. I'm going to go down to the report. In total, it's 14.9 million that's been exempted, roughly about 40 million that's been collected during it. And the biggest takeaway, you can see that in 2023, there hasn't been any exemption, and actually it kind of ended in May of 22 for oil and July of 22 for natural gas. The offshoot of that is that prices rebounded quite nicely, if you're most anybody of that opinion of some decent oil and gas prices in the state. For the foreseeable future, oil incentives probably are not going to come back. Natural gas, however, on the other hand, last year, about February, March, that price began to destabilize once again, and has been very low since then. In all probability, March or April of 2024, any new production that comes on will most likely qualify for it. So this the sideboards on the time frame are December 31st, 2025. At that point in time, the legislature will have to determine whether to extend this or to let it sunset. The other provision in here was that the tax break for the first 6 months would be 2%, and for the following 6 months would be only 1%. So fairly succinct facts. Hopefully that's clear in the report. I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Any questions? All right, we'll just keep going. Thank you. Mr. Fanning?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, Brett Fanning, I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And I think Director Henson did an outstanding job of kind of laying the framework for this, so I'll just kind of get to it. The first one going to kind of go over is the manufacturing survey that we do. So I have testified several times just based on conversations related to these exemption surveys, but related to the manufacturing one. So the manufacturing, what we do is we basically send out a letter, and it's the same for all of these exemption surveys. So we send out a letter to our taxpayers that we have in our system, say, hey, can you respond back and tell us how much exempt purchases you made based on a certain exemption, and let us know, we'll compile it, and then we'll run some figures for you. So with the manufacturing survey, and this is one, the exemption dates back to 2004. And again, Mr. Chairman, so I am gonna go through these surveys. I'm not gonna go over every single point in them. I know there's time here, but if there is something you would like me to address, make sure you stop me as I go through these. So based on our surveys for the manufacturers, we sent out 1,342 surveys to manufacturers that we had in our system. And so from that 1,300 surveys, we got back 520. Out of that 520, we had 135 companies say, hey, yes, we utilize this exemption. So as I've testified several times in front of this committee, that response rate is less than 40%. And so any of the figures that we have in here, it's hard for us to say that they're reliable. And I've actually looked at some of the lists that we've sent out, and I know that these figures are not accurate, just based on who's responding and who's not. And so just based on the manufacturers also have something a little unique in our statutes as well. So not all of manufacturers have to license with us. So that's Wyoming Statute 39-15-106J. What this means is that for manufacturers, we don't even have a complete list to start from. So we do the best we have with the manufacturers that are listed in our system and then move on from there. So for those folks who responded back to our surveys, and now I'm going to go to page, so the exemption cost, it's on page 3 of the manufacturing survey. So the manufacturers reported back to us, they reported back almost 80 million in exempt purchases. And then if you use just an average sales tax rate in Wyoming, that's $4.2 million just in an exempted sales tax that without the exemption maybe would have come in. And so again, take it, there's no projection in that figure. It's just based on the 38% response rate that we had. Then as we go on through the manufacturing surveys, a lot of the statute, as Director Henson mentioned, is trying to quantify aggregate wages, jobs, employment figures. And a lot of this is the Department of Revenue compiling it from various agencies. So unless there's further questions on kind of the employment figures with the manufacturing surveys, and then kind of the REMI model done by the Wyoming Division of Administration and Information, ANI, we can move forward to the next report.
Any questions? No? No? Co-chairman?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to cover any of the REMI analysis on these, or were you planning on that or not? I just, because if not, I'm going to ask you a specific question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, no, I was not planning on answering. The main reason is because this is done by a completely separate state agency. And so their questions, any questions you may have, may be better directed towards
So
them.
just go to page 11 then of that manufacturing and the REMI analysis. So I scroll down there. And you know, that's the thing, whenever we pass these, we always want to know what's the real cost benefit thing. That's what we're trying to answer on it. And so I just want to, as I read that, the economic impact, the removal of this, if we got rid of this exemption, right? Because anytime you give an exemption, and it's made up somewhere else by somebody else, but what is the benefit of it? So I read this, it's 9 million, would increase the production cost by 9 million. So the removal of the exemption result in an average annual loss of 80 jobs and a decrease in the GDP of 11.6 million per year, or the 23-30 when compared per year. So it seems like this is a win for us as I read. Am I reading that right? I mean, it costs us 9 million, but we're probably getting 11 million in benefit. I don't know if I'm reading it right though. That's what I'm asking the group here.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, based on the information we provided to ANI, that is what their model says.
Because as you read the other REMI analysis, it's not this good. Not as the committee, it's actually, you go, holy cow. This is really one of the better ones, really, according to this. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next one I'm going to discuss is the broadband service providers. I tried to just go down the list as they appeared on the website. And so this is another one, if you join me on page 2 and 3. So this is a fairly new exemption, came about in 2019. And so if you join me on page number 3, step back real quick. So with broadband providers and data centers, we work with the Wyoming Business Council to get that list. It's important to note that in a lot of cases, broadband providers and data centers wouldn't have to license with us. So it is important to note. So we work with the Wyoming Business Council, and that's outlined in the statute as well, to get this list so we can go about our survey process. So based on the list from Wyoming Business Council, we mailed 12 companies out a survey, and we received 6 responses back. So 50 responses back. And then 4 of those reported exempt purchases of broadband equipment. Now, with this broadband equipment, it's also to note that the equipment has to be used as an economic incentive to provide broadband internet services in unserved areas. So that was kind of the intent, and that's the way this exemption works. So according to the responses we received, there are some broadband providers that maybe are not fulfilling that need in an area, or however that works, didn't report it. But we did have half of the folks respond to us. And then if you join me based on the exemption costs, so of those 6 companies that responded back to us, they reported 7.8 million in an exemption cost. And if you take our average sales tax rate, you're looking at 419,000 in unrealized sales tax revenue. So again, I'll go forward on this, just 4, 5, 6, the rest of these pages in our exemption report are compiled by the Department of Revenue. Some of them are aggregated from wage information that we received from broadband providers. But then if you join me for Mr. Co-Chairman's question, I know he's going to ask me, is based on the data that we had provided for this REMI model, you can look down here and see that for the telecommunications industry, removing this exemption means that you would increase costs to the broadband providers by $500,000. And then you're looking at a decrease in GDP of 300,000 per year, and then a loss of a couple jobs. And I'm not trying to understate one job versus not. I'm just summarizing the data here. So, and with that, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any questions, I can move on to the next. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next one I'm going to outline is the qualifying data centers. So if you join me on page number 2, this bill is also fairly new as with regard to our exemptions. So there's really three parts of this exemption. So the first part of this is if you want to be a data center here in Wyoming and get this exemption, you've got to work with the Wyoming Business Council. Say you're going to create a bunch of jobs, make big investments in your communities, and then you can get certified as a data center by the Wyoming Business Council. Once that happens, then there are 2 different types of purchases that you can make. So the first one is, so you can buy the vast majority of all of your computer equipment without tax if you purchase at least $2 million a year in these purchases. So that's kind of the first part of this. So basically any computer equipment that you can buy without tax as long as you purchase at least $2 million or more. That's the first part. The second part is you can basically buy all of your power supplies without tax if you make at least $2 million in purchases a year or more. So if you meet those kind of classifications, you're a certified data center with our business council, and then you make these purchases, then you can get this exemption here. And so if you want to join me on page number 4 of the data center exemption report, again, working with the Wyoming Business Council because they have this list. We sent surveys to 5 entities and we received responses back from 2 of them. And so of the 2 responses, only 1 qualified for both parts of this exemption. Because remember, these are big businesses, $2 million a year in certain types of purchases. Plus they've had to state and work with the business council that they're going to create a bunch of jobs and make significant investments in your community. So if we take a look, if you come down to the response rate, so remember 2 out of 5, come down to this exemption cost. So for part 1, which is basically all of your computer equipment for a data center, there was $241 million reported in exempt sales or exempt purchases by those companies. So then in addition, the second part of that exemption survey, there was $179 million in interruptible power supplies, so power supplies. So you're looking at last fiscal year, $420 million in exempt purchases. And then if you do an average sales tax rate, you're looking at $22 million in unrealized sales tax. So
Yeah, question.
Senator Pappas.
So they're exempt from sales and use tax, but now they're still paying a tangible personal property tax, right? So how much of that will they be paying in personal property taxes?
Mr. Chairman, Director Henson is an amazing expert in answering that question.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, I don't have the specific because in order for me to equate that to property tax, again, acquisition value, whatever they paid for it, trended to a today's dollar, depreciated based on the life expectancy of that equipment. And then, of course, we have to apply the applicable mill levy. So first, we don't have that information specific to all of the companies. And so that's really hard to estimate. But it is something that I would believe that this committee and the legislature would probably like to see in a report of this nature in the future. So as we look at this list of things that you may wish to see in this report, because that's not included in the statute right now, it is something that perhaps in the future we need to ask those taxpayers, how much do they pay in property tax, not only on this equipment, but the company as a whole, land, improvements, personal property. There's just a bigger picture on the investment into our communities in Wyoming than is recognized within these reports.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess intuitively, I would think that, yes, maybe we're giving them an exemption, you know, for the small percentage of sales and use tax that they would pay upfront. But the impact long-term, I think is probably intuitively, I think is much greater than not giving them that and not enticing them to come to the state because we've given them that carrot at the beginning. And so I would really love to see the difference in the two taxes and what they pay long-term over a certain period versus what we give up at the beginning.
Chairman Beitman, Senator Pappas, I would be remiss if I didn't also, make that point in that for sales and use tax, the distribution of those dollars is much different than the distribution of property tax dollars. And so as we look at tax policy in this state, that's why it's important that we look at, for example, the taxation of data processing services in full, as to, to know where those tax dollars are going. And if the policy of the legislatures to, look at possibly exempting property taxation of personal property, we've just stated, land and buildings, not the big expense for a data center. So if you exempt the property tax piece, then I think that it makes sense to go back and look at the sales tax exemption in conjunction with that. But it would be nice to have all of that information included in one report for your viewing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, especially since we have different beneficiaries of each tax, so yeah.
Good stuff. Any more questions? All right, keep going, Mr. Fanning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then moving forward in this data center exemption report, again, you can see some of the wage information, some of the benefits. It is important to note before I move forward that our staff does spend about 40 hours for each one of these exemption surveys. And so that's compiling all the data, working with the various agencies. So we've got the Wyoming Business Council, Wyoming Workforce Services, A&I, and then internally amongst ourselves. So there are a lot of moving pieces here. So if you do join me on page number 10 for the REMI model, again, based on the information that we provided to them, you can see that it would raise costs of $15 million per year if you were to remove this exemption, decrease GDP by 6 million over the period, and then a loss of 56 jobs. So you've got kind of this, and again, the REMI model, you've seen our survey results and the respondents there. And so it is important to note that those were the figures that are used in this analysis. And so if we have concerns going into the data, what do we get coming out of it? And valid discussion about the various property taxes that you're going to pay, the sales and use taxes you're going to pay, the taxes you're going to collect from customers. All those factors are something that could certainly be up for discussion.
Yeah. And Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I guess failing memory, but we don't require them to report if they claim the exemption. So they can claim the exemption and not fill out the survey. Shouldn't be able to have that both ways, you wouldn't. So we can make sure we have good data, but okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If a business does not have an imposition statute with us, they do not have to license with us, which means they don't have to report tax. And then we don't have any requirement in statute that if you're claiming an exemption, you've got to register with us, license with us, check in with us, fill in the blank. So,
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, so the only opportunity that lies to look at those types of records is if the company were to be audited by the Department of Audit. We don't have access to any of that information.
Good to know. Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, and fair enough. But I think even to just fill out the survey, so thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fanning?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last but not least, we have the exemption for coal gasification. And so this is one, it has been on the books since 2006. As of right now, we don't have any known companies that are utilizing this exemption. But again, I was thinking about this morning. It kind of goes back to, we wouldn't know if they have to license with us in the first place, just based on their business operations. But at this point, no known companies utilizing this exemption. So, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I have for the exemption reports. Again, I went through those quick. It was not quick enough. I apologize if so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Any questions, Senator Pappas?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, back on the broadband exemption, how does the program that, the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity and Development Program and those monies that Wyoming Business Council is, administering right now, how, does any of that federal money allow or affect any exemption that we would give? Maybe it's something you can't answer, maybe something I need to ask the Wyoming Business Council, but I know there's the BEAD program out there now, and certain companies are vying for it, and I understand there's some inequities built in the way they're selecting companies, and just wondered if any of this affected Department of Revenue.
Mr. Fanning?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, outstanding question, twofold. The first one is, your question is a really good one to ask the Wyoming Business Council on how that impacts in the bidding. And as far as the second part of it, would their money they're receiving from the federal government impact this exemption? The answer is no. If the broadband company is purchasing that equipment and it's for this underserved area, they would be entitled to that exemption.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Fanning? Thank you. Good information as always. Appreciate you. Is that it for Department of Revenue? Committee, any final thoughts, last questions before we let them go? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you very much. Any public comment regarding the Department of Revenue? Seeing none. Any committee directives? We want to fire off some bill drafts? No, just kidding. 5 o'clock. Yeah, no, okay. Well, that concludes that item on the agenda. We'll move on to our last item, which is property tax issues and our bill draft 24 LSO 183 Special District Accumulated Reserves. And we have LSO here to walk us through that bill. Welcome. Thank you.
Chairman Beitman, members of the committee, Katie Adams, LSO. This is 24 LSO 183 Special Districts Accumulated Reserves Working Draft 0.5. At the last meeting, there was a mill levy bill that the committee directed LSO to cut down to just address the special districts. And so this bill draft amends 3913-104K, which applies to the certification of tax levies. On page 2, the bill draft creates a new paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 states that the Board of County Commissioners shall not certify tax levies for a special district whose total accumulated reserves exceed 7 times the special district's current adopted budget under section 1612-408. The effective date would be January 1st, 2025. And then in preparing for this meeting, a question came up about whether or not this would apply to community college districts. And so we reached out to the Wyoming Community College Commission, and their answer was generally that it wouldn't apply to them because the Board of County Commissioners doesn't certify tax levies for that district. And I think LSO generally agrees with that. So there's 10 mills that the community college can do, 4 are required to receive state funding, 5 are approved by the electors, and then there's 1 that could conceivably apply. So if the committee wanted to, it could clarify one way or the other whether or not this applies to college districts, community college districts. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, not sure about that. And the reason why is This all started, I brought this up in June, I believe, in Sheridan, that when I was a county commissioner, there was members of a certain special district came to us and said, do something, lower their mills that they get. So we checked into it, and our county attorney checked with the state attorney general, and the law says that county commissioners shall set the mill levies. Well, so we thought we'd do that, but the attorney general says, you have to set the mills, but yet you cannot have any say in any of these special districts that have an elected board, like your fire, your cemetery, your whatever. So we couldn't do anything with those boards. It's just boards that, like Fair Board or different things that maybe, or library, whatever, that we appointed the board members, we had a say in. So that's kind of where this all comes from. So yeah, I there may need to be some more digging on that college thing, but because it's elected board, but it's still a special district, that I believe the county commissioners have to set the mill levies, shall, no option there. So might need to dig into that further, but anyway. Sorry, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. So that's kind of where this came from. This would, this bill would set it at 7 times. I think that's needs to be lowered, but people can comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for LSO on the bill draft? Seeing none. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any public comment? Public comment on the bill draft? Mr. Reedman, welcome back.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Reeman here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I'll start off by saying we don't have a position on this bill at this point in time, but I do have a few comments to share based on some outreach that I made to county commissioners on this particular topic. And I'll just say, Senator French, former commissioner, he knows all too well, this special district county commissioner interface is, at times problematic, and some of these statutes are part of that. The good former commissioner mentioned that one type of special district. There are those that are voter approved and have their own boards. And generally in those situations, county commissioners have no authority over their budget, over the mill levy. It does say shall levy that mill. There are other special districts that are born from the county commissioners, your fair board, your museum district, and these can be sometimes one or the other in some of these situations. And in those cases, again, the commissioners may not have the ability to change the mill levy, but for county commission appointed special districts, they do have veto authority over the budget. So that's sort of the mechanism by which they can work to control those particular budgets. But no special district is necessarily alike to another special district. It's all the creation that you all have put forward. Mr. Chairman, I would say there are a couple of things that I heard from the commissioners that I spoke to, and beyond what I've stated so far. One is, does this legislation go far enough? Because although this says you shall not do this, we still have a number of other places in statute that say the commissioners shall. So there's a conflict that ultimately arises with this language and those particular statutes. So I don't know if you have to insert some notwithstanding language in here to address that. I'm not the attorney, but it's something that was brought forward. The next one was, what about startup special districts? One of my counties, Carbon County, they have a new fire district, which is collecting revenues for the establishment of that special district, but they haven't, hired staff. They haven't bought any fire trucks or any other equipment, a building in order to operate that. So right now their budget, or at least their revenues, are quite high against the budget that they're operating from. And that commissioner said, well, this probably excludes them from being able to grow their budget to address those issues that they've got to work through. So it just a consideration for all of you. The best way that I could come up with to address that is, rather than a shall not, put a may not, because then it leaves the commissioners in the ability to try and work through those special circumstances. So with that, Mr. Chairman, again, I just wanted to share some of those thoughts. Don't know where we might come out, but this is always on the minds of county commissioners as they hear from constituents in their neighborhoods. So that, Mr. Chairman, I'd take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. Any questions? Thank you. Any other public comment? Nobody's rushing the stage here. Eve, do we have anybody on Zoom? Nope. Okay, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? It's been moved by Senator French.
Second.
Seconded by the co-chair. Very enthusiastically. Comments, discussion?
Amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Coach.
Mr. Chairman, I think on that was suggested, and we're talking here on line 2, page 2, the shall, change that to may. And I just think that then it gives locals, because we don't know all those stories, statewide. Maybe that in that year in Park County, it was the right thing to do. Maybe they're saving for, cemetery improvement. I think last year we changed the statute, Senior Citizens Board, so they could build housing. And so I think all those things, it's hard for us to do. I think the May thing at least would give, I think, Commissioner French back in the day an answer to that. Before he had no answer, he couldn't do it. So that's my thought on it. So that's my amendment of May before I discuss.
Okay.
I'd second that, but I'd also like to say that, like irrigation boards, for example, are required to hold X amount of dollars in their accounts so that they back up what they're getting from Wyoming Water Development or from federal dollars. And so that affects that 7 times. And then I worry about little towns like Meeteetse or like Ten Sleep or some of the other little towns in their fire departments trying to buy a new fire truck. And it could take them 10 or 15 years to get that enough money to buy a new fire truck. So.
Okay, so having the may gives them that flexibility.
That's correct.
Okay. Any discussion, committee? Discussion. Oh, LSO?
Mr. Chairman, could LSO have some latitude to change it to specify that they may decline to certify or
Right.
something along those lines, so we don't have the language may not?
Right.
We would usually avoid that.
Yeah. Thanks, that's a good question, thank you. Okay. Committee, any, Senator Pappas?
So if we put that language in there, what's the point of the bill then? Well, I mean,
Commissioners can go in and say, we think that you have an excess of funds in your savings account, and I'm not sure that we meet the whole 1.5 million that you're asking. One number.
so we're allowing them to go to 7 times. And so you're saying they can say, no, we'll pick 2 times. Am I reading this wrong? So explain to me. I probably am understanding it wrong.
Representative Barry, you want to take a stab at it?
I'll take a stab at it. They can accumulate up to 7 times without any input from the county commissioners. The county commissioners have to certify their mill. Once they've reached 7, if this amendment passes, then they may decline to certify their mill.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
So as it stands right now, they can do anything, right? And go 17 times. And they still have to certify it?
Correct.
Understand.
Yes, Senator French, and then move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add to it, our situation, the district had the ability, I believe it was 3 mills, and their budget was, I'm trying to remember back, it's been a number of years ago, but I want to say it was like $1.5 million. And they had like $20 million worth of reserves. Well, that's a severe case of overtaxing the public. They didn't need that kind of money. Because we had oil revenues, good oil prices in Park County, they just accumulated all these reserves, and the public was just screaming at us, "That's baloney." And I said, well, the state says there's nothing we can do about it. So this is an attempt to put some guardrails on it, whatever you want to call it, that sometimes, if that's where that's coming from, because they weren't, well, I've got to be careful here. They weren't really listening to the public that was paying the bill. They were hoarding a whole lot of money, and they really didn't need to. And it's just a matter of overtaxing the folks, So what's the right number? 7 times seems like too much. I think it should be less than that, but.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator Pappas.
Okay, so I understand that, but it seems like maybe the number is arbitrary. You could pick 4, you could pick 5, you could pick 7. Seems arbitrary, but with the language that we're changing it to by the amendment, they can go over 7.5 times if there's a special circumstance. They could determine that. Am I correct?
Yeah, we haven't voted on the amendment yet. So the amendments, we're on the amendment now to make them shall a may. And we're just discussing what the ramifications of doing that would be.
So if we do may, then they can exceed the 7.5% if there's an extenuating circumstance. But the county commissioners would have to determine that within their commission. But they could exceed the 7%, the 7%. That's what I'm understanding.
Okay, Senator French?
I'll try to clarify that a little. If it's changed to may, it would read the Board of County Commissioners may not certify tax levies for special districts whose total accumulated reserves exceed, at this point, 7 times the special district's current adopted budget. So they couldn't, there might be special circumstances that the county commissioners would look at and say, oh, geez, they blew a fire truck, and whatever that number is, but it's trying to put a cap on it. As it is now, it's unlimited on the reserves they can accumulate. So it's an attempt to kind of put a cap on that. And if there's a special circumstance, then the county commissioners can look at it and say, oh, wow, this is a special circumstance. You may be able to have a little more to buy those 2 fire trucks, and that wipes out half or 2/3 of your reserves.
Okay. Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Any questions? Comfortable? All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? One no? Okay, yes, that has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any further amendments? Representative?
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment or move an amendment to move it from 7 to 3. And here's my thinking. When we talk about these smaller communities and things like that, still, they need to build into their budgets those kinds of things. We've got to replace a truck every 3 years, every 5 years. I don't know what that is, but I would assume that's built into the budgets. And this 3 or 7% is actually based on the budget. And so I would propose that we move this to something lower and make that probably more like 3%. Yeah, or 3 times, I'm sorry, 3 times.
Okay.
Thank you.
Been moved. Seconded. Committee? Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of Representative Locke's amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Division, I can't tell, so all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. All those opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Representative Storer is gone, so it probably would have been a tie, but that one does pass. All right, so that's been adopted. Committee, any other amendments? Any other amendments? Question being called. Eve, would you please call the roll?
Senator French. Aye. Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Pappas. No. Representative Bear.
Aye.
Representative Byron.
Aye.
Representative Locke.
Aye.
Representative Northrup.
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Storer is not here. Representative Strzok.
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer. Could you repeat that, Representative Zwanitzer?
No.
Thank you. Co-Chairman Harshman.
Aye.
And Chairman Bateman.
Aye. And did Representative Storer leave a vote?
She did. She left a no vote, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it is 11 ayes and 3 noes.
11 ayes, 3 noes. That has been adopted. We will sponsor that bill. And that, my friends, clears the desk. Committee, any further directives, comments, concerns? Seeing none, thank you, committee, for a good interim. This concludes our work for the interim. We'll see you all in February. Thank you all for your patience today. Thank you, LSO, for all your hard work throughout the interim. You guys did a great job for us. We always appreciate you. And safe travels to everybody. This meeting's been adjourned.